perfectly well what they were thinking, but immediately decided to tell them that there was no need to worry, because unlike studying on the street, he assured them that it would be safe and easy here. The students immediately thought that he was simply lying, because in this academy nothing happens that easily. No matter how they thought, Urgam decided that it was time for them to start, and to begin with, he asked each of them to pour water into their cauldron, and added to this that alchemy is a complex art, and there are no unnecessary stages. He immediately warned them that if they missed anything, they would never become excellent alchemists, and now they would prepare a low-level regeneration potion with them. Lihan opened the alchemy book and immediately realized that it would be quite difficult for them to prepare this today, even considering the fact that it was just a low-level potion. At first glance, alchemy seems simpler than other magic, and many people think that it is enough to simply follow a written recipe. But in reality, this is far from the case. Alchemy in real life is similar to cooking haute cuisine. In addition, before cooking, you need to collect fresh ingredients from different places, and remembering how to cook them, and in what order will allow you to keep up with time. But even in this case, we must not forget about clear hand movements. Well, if you miss something, you will end up with something strange that will obviously not be suitable as a potion. Urgam watched every year how first-year students made the same mistakes, and this moment was so long awaited for him because he could laugh and relax a little. But at some point, the professor turned his attention to Likan, and looking at him, the man began to understand that in fact, not all first-year students are doomed to failure. Watching Lihan prepare this potion almost perfectly, the professor simply couldn't help but ask himself the question, why is this guy so good? It seemed to Urgam that the guy looked like an alchemist who had been in business for 10 years and was making this potion not for the first time in his life. Although, on the other hand, he was glad that his students were so talented, and Likan would most likely become a genius of alchemy when he grew up. At least that's what the professor thought. This is exactly how Urgam Likan imagined the thoughts in his head. It seemed to the guy that this was exactly what his teacher was thinking about now. But in his head, the guy believed that the man was wrong, if only because in a past life he had already done similar things. So now for him, this is not such a difficult task as it seems. The professor was finally able to taste what Lihan had prepared, and as soon as he took the first sip of this low-level potion, he immediately felt his entire body fill with mana. This greatly refreshed his body. He was pleased to realize that the guy had prepared a simply wonderful potion. The man also added that at first he did not believe that Likan really understood how to brew this potion correctly. But now he is happy to report that he was mistaken, and one of them managed to brew the perfect potion. Most of the guys weren't really surprised by this, although it was still unexpected that Likan would perform well here too. His friend was not surprised that Lihan would do the best, even after Siana from the Phoenix Tower also made an excellent potion. But it still did not compare with Lihan's potion in the end. As soon as the guy looked at this girl, he immediately realized that she was from the Snake People, and apparently a member of the Freemeng Church. Ina once told him that in their religion they worship alchemy, which is why this church is called Fremenga. And all the members of this church are, unsurprisingly, experienced alchemists, so Siana is also good at this. The girl noticed how Lihan was looking at her and decided to come up first to greet him and introduce herself as Siana. The guy immediately answered her that he was also incredibly pleased and introduced himself as Likan, who can be called without mentioning his last name to his family. But when they shook hands, Likan immediately noticed that her hands were cold, and probably because she was from the people of snakes. The girl interrupted his thoughts because she wanted to say that she would never have thought that she would meet such an experienced believer here, and therefore she immediately wanted to know if the guy was trained at home. But before he could answer, Professor Urgam suddenly started yelling at them for talking and politely asked them to take their seats for now, so Lihan had to say that it would be better for them to talk later. After which the professor turned to all the students and said that they all tried to make the same potion, but the results were different and this was absolutely normal, so he thought there was no need to worry. Moreover, according to him, this is just the beginning, and there are much more complex and strange things that they will have to do in the world of alchemy. Likan smiled while listening to him, but mentally the guy rewarded the professor for being the best among those who are able to discourage the desire to study. While the guy was thinking about this, the professor continued to say that he wanted them to bring a low-level spiritual friendship potion next week. This would be their homework, which he would try himself, so he asked them to approach this matter especially carefully. But he decided not to leave them without instructions, so he asked them to write it down and also recommended taking the main ingredients from the boxes. For Nelia, it was so strange because she thought that he would force them to figure out how to do it themselves. Yenna, in turn, did not see anything strange in this because she believed that they were still learning, and the professor himself knew how to do it better. But as soon as she looked into the box, she realized that there were not enough ingredients to prepare this potion, and Nelia had only one twig. Therefore, Yenna decided to ask the professor where they could find spiritual flowering grass. Urgam didn't quite understand what she was talking about, and immediately made it clear that if they were missing something, they would have to find it on their own. After which she turned around and repeated once again that they had the main ingredients in the boxes, and the grass was over there. The only thing he could do for them was to wish them good luck. He could only hope that they remembered his words well from the first lecture. But from the expressions on the girls' faces, it was clearly clear that they were not entirely delighted. A few hours later that day, Li-han and Digeling gathered again to drink some tea, and this time the girl again enjoyed the taste of this wonderful drink from Li-kan. The guy saw perfectly well that the girl really liked this tea, although in fact it was half soup, but still he tried not to show it. Suddenly their dialogue was interrupted by a voice that addressed Li-kan. It was Siana, according to whom she had been trying to find a guy for a long time, but did not expect to see him here. Li-kan was ready to talk to her without any problems, and as it turned out, she wanted to ask him one question, which related to alchemy homework. After which, she reminded him that they had to make a low-level potion of spiritual friendship, and the essence of her question was that she invited the guy to go together to get the ingredients. But from the point of view of the students of the Phoenix Tower, Li-kan did not look the best, and specifically they were simply scared to be around him because they knew very well what rumors were circulating. Li-kan himself was very glad that the students from the other tower were finally the first to turn to him. Moreover, there was a whole group of them. Therefore, he did not mind agreeing to such a proposal, after which Siana asked him to invite several students from the Blue Dragon Tower with him, because she thought that it would be great if students from both towers worked together. Li-han replied that he would try to do this, and after they left, Digeling decided to immediately ask Li-han if he was friends with Siana, to which Li-han confidently answered her that they were going to alchemy classes with her, and in response he decided to inquire why is she asking. But the girl did not give him an answer to this question, but simply said that it was nothing. Li-kan immediately realized that she was simply hiding something, so he even had to stand up a little and ask the girl to finish since she had already started it. But she believed that it was rude to discuss a person behind his back. After all, she thought that if she started talking about Xian, Li-han might think that she was speaking badly about her. But after hearing this, the guy became even more interested in hearing what Digeling was hiding. But looking at her, he understood perfectly well that she was not one of those who would spill the beans so easily. Therefore, he decided to be proactive, and at some point he simply stood up and began to pray. It was so unexpected and surprising for Digeling, but still she decided to ask the guy what he was doing? To which Li-kan replied that he believes that talking about someone behind his back is bad, but there is nothing wrong with talking to yourself during prayer. She came closer to him and started talking about how he was just trying to force her to close her eyes and tell her everything. But Li-kan didn't let her finish and simply interrupted, saying that he couldn't hear anything during prayer. The girl immediately stopped talking, and in fact, Li-han expected a slightly different reaction from the girl. Apparently this was simply not enough. Then he decided to say that he almost died during the attack of students from the White Tiger Tower, but still he miraculously managed to survive. But he didn't stop there either, and began to pray that if Siana's sister was so cunning as to do this when they went to the mountains, then he asked God for help. Instead of telling the guy something, Digeling sat down next to him, and also began to pray, although at one point in her prayer she began to say that she was not telling this to speak ill of someone or blame him. After which she told the guy that in the Phoenix Tower everyone is a believer and good, but not everyone has given up their worldly feelings, despite the fact that envy and enmity have no place in faith. And all this was in order to begin to tell the story of how last week in the Phoenix Tower dormitory, one first-year created a potion that restored energy, and he did it for everyone. This was a great solution for studying because not only was it perfectly prepared, but it was actually so refreshing. Therefore, some of the guys began to say that he did even better than his sister Siana. The girl herself absolutely agreed with this. She even added that compared to this guy she did not have enough experience. Nothing else happened that day, which could not be said about the next, when the girl came with the news that she had prepared an energy restoration potion and asked everyone to try it. They were also grateful to her for what she did, and for the second day in a row they felt such lightness. No one paid much attention to it then, but the next day and after that, Sister Siana continued to prepare these potions one after another. Each time she wanted to hear confirmation that everyone liked her potion. That's when everyone realized how screwed they really were when they said that she was worse at preparing these potions than that guy. So they decided to correct themselves and told her that she was the best in this matter. Only after that she calmed down a little and stopped preparing this low-level potion. Listening to this story carefully, Li-han concluded that Siana has an incredibly strong competitive spirit. But Digeling asked him not to interrupt because this story did not end there. After all, after a while when she passed by her brother, who had prepared those potions, she simply ignored him, although at that moment he was trying to praise her for preparing an excellent potion. Li-kan began to understand that the girl apparently harbored an incredibly huge amount of resentment, But what interested him more was that she reacted this way to a simple trifle. And he remembered how Lee Khan was showered with compliments in an alchemy class. And then he began to understand why she so abruptly decided to make friends with him. Lee Khan asked Digiling to tell him everything she knew. But the girl pretended that she did not understand what he was telling her, because they had just prayed. Now Lee Khan began to understand perfectly well that since she is such a person, then he should be as careful as possible in alchemy classes. However, the next day, Lee Khan faced a new test, which happened to him during a lesson on studying the basics of magical symbols together with the director of the academy, who in this lesson tried to convey to them that they would definitely love each other and work together in harmony. He absolutely did not care about their personal feelings, and on this wonderful note for him, he decided to give them a task. The task was that each tower would have to go to another assigned tower to get a flag that was in the first-year common room. This flag would be recognizable due to the drawing on it, and they would have to bring it to the next lesson, after which he just kicked everyone out from the office. The students simply did not understand how this was supposed to help them in learning symbols at all, because it seemed to them that the director was simply trying to set them against each other. But what was most offensive for the Blue Dragon was that they got the White Tiger Tower, and now they believed that they would definitely not be able to come to an agreement with them, which means that they would not be able to take this flag. Although the biggest problem was that the Blue Dragon's flag had already gone to the White Tigers, and they, in turn, were unlikely to give up theirs, because these barbarians were not familiar with the concept of honor. At least, that's what the Blue Dragon students thought. Even Lee Khan in this case understood that in reality everything was bad for them. Although he didn't want to give up so easily, and refusing to complete the assignment was tantamount to giving up grades. He understood that they did not know what homework awaited them next in this crazy school. So he believed that they simply had to complete such a simple task. Lee Khan simply did not want to let his grades drop for the sake of such a trifle, and in order to correct this, he decided to first turn to the guys, to whom he actually didn't say much, or rather, he simply asked them not to give up so early. They were immediately glad that it was Lee Khan who told them this, because they knew that this guy always has a backup plan that can help them out. Lee Khan has never seen people change clothes so quickly. They just died, and now they're standing happy and ready to do whatever he tells them. Just as Lee Khan was about to announce his plan to them, Asen stopped him, who started talking about how he seemed to know what Lee Khan was going to say. He was 95% sure that the guy would invite them to sneak into the White Tiger Tower secretly. Lee Khan did not understand why Asen organized such a concert in order to say this, because it seemed obvious. The guy didn't even continue to speak when all the students began to tell him at once that they had expected exactly such insolence from him. So they began to ask him to allow them to participate in this plan. They believed that he was the only one who could see them through to the end, because he was the one who came up with this plan. Lee Khan did not refuse anyone, because he perfectly understood that no one wanted to think for themselves, and apparently he would have to do it all for them again. The next day, Lee Khan went to another lesson in combat magic, and looking at the sun rising, he thought that he was actually quite pressed for deadlines, because he needed to steal the flag from the White Tiger Tower, and, on top of all this, complete the professor's task Urgulma. But the problem was that both of these tasks were incredibly difficult for him at this stage. As soon as he entered the combat magic class, the professor immediately decided to notify him that the guy was 15 seconds late. Lee Khan immediately asked him to forgive him for this, but he thought the reason was quite valid because he stayed late in the dormitory, although the professor immediately told him that there was nothing to apologize for. And all because the professor believed that only he was worse off from being late. Lee Khan couldn't even imagine where the man learned to answer like that, but all he could do was smile and nod. In any case, it was time to end the talking time, and the teacher asked the guy to draw a circle with a metal ball. Lee Khan was 100% ready for this task, so without thinking for a long time, he took out this ball and showed the professor everything he had learned. Looking at this, the man thought that it seemed that the last battle had awakened something in him, because his control had become much better. But the professor still did not show it, and simply said that Lee Khan was doing well now, but still asked him to sit on own place. It was quite unexpected for Lee Khan to hear this, because hearing from such a professor is not bad. It was worth a lot, in fact. This is a rather rare compliment. After the guy took his seat, the professor began to talk about how he heard that Lee Khan had learned to create water, so he asked him to do it. Lee Khan didn't quite understand why the professor needed this, but still created a water balloon without any problems. After which the professor asked him to reduce this water ball to the size of this magic ball with which they are training. This task was no longer as easy as the first one and caused the guy some difficulties in completing it. While Lee Khan was trying to make the same ball out of water, the guy noticed how the teacher at one moment approached the balls and took it in his hands. The guy, without realizing it, began to worry because strange thoughts were creeping into his head. And unfortunately, these thoughts came true, and the professor began to attack Lee Khan with the help of these balls. The guy was too focused on creating a water ball that he simply did not know how to repel this blow. At the last moment, he was able to direct this water ball against the ball that the professor launched at him. And it actually worked, and Li Kan was still able to repel this blow, although not without problems. But apparently this was only the beginning, because the professor immediately began to reach for the second ball, no matter how Li Kan asked him to stop. The guy simply did not understand why he was doing this, and besides, he believed that all this was too dangerous for him. But the professor believed that in this case the main advantage is that it is quite effective, but whether it is dangerous or not is a completely different question. After which he decided to add that he was almost sure that the guy experienced something similar in the battle with anti-magicians. He believed that in moments of danger, his concentration and instincts sharpened, while increasing his control over mana. Therefore, he simply did not understand why Li Kan was even trying to take the long route when the answer was right in front of his nose. Li Kan did not want to believe that the professor was telling him all this in all seriousness, because he almost died then. In any case, the professor believed that the guy understood his intentions, so he invited him to continue the lesson. Li Han realized that in this lesson, arguing was just a waste of energy, so he simply began to create a water ball. And at this moment, Li Han thought that unlike the Star Spirit Stone and the Metal Ball, his water ball simply does not have a fixed shape, which is why he has to concentrate more, and also needs to pay attention to maintaining its size. On top of everything else, the professor attacks him with the help of his balls. This time he also did it quite unexpectedly for Li Kan, but the guy was completely prepared for this, so he was able to repel his attack. At least that's what it seemed to Li Kan himself, who couldn't even think that this ball would work like a boomerang, which without much difficulty will hit the guy right in the back and deal him a pretty strong blow. After such a rather vile blow, Li Kan had to stand for a while to recover. And while he was doing this, the professor once again asked him to do everything so that he could concentrate to the maximum. Li Han couldn't breathe normally, and now he learned one very interesting thing, that in classes where they assign a lot of homework, it is much better than this. The next day, during a lesson on basic magic, one of the students started a conversation about how she heard that her friend would have to go to the mountains again to get herbs for his alchemy homework. The answer surprised her a little, because the guy told her that this time Professor Ingerdell agreed to go with students from another tower. And this meant only one thing for them, that he would go there with Vardanaz. Li Kan simply looked at them with a tired look and thought that they wanted to make friends with him as soon as possible, since they were not looking at him so intently. Professor Garcia entered the class and was glad to see all her students, so she happily greeted them. Then she added that today they would study something else, and not elementary magic, and as they might have guessed, it would not be her who would teach. But for this she brought a professor who is an expert in this field. Some students immediately began discussing what they wanted to see now. Some wanted to study the magic of spirits now, and some were not against learning the magic of healing. But as soon as that same professor entered the class, everyone suddenly lost their mood, and each of them felt some strange trembling throughout their body. The man who gave them this strange feeling called himself Mortem, and, as they might have already guessed, he was a teacher of dark magic. Necromancy, curses, elements of darkness and poisons, negative energy, and much more. All this is what people study in a dark magic lesson. But many people are disturbed by dark magic, so they try not to get close to it. In his head, Li Kan imagined dark magic with one very interesting example, when a couple walks through the forest, who, unfortunately for them, got lost. And at some point they stumble upon some person whom they, of course, were incredibly scared of. But then they see that he uses light magic, and this gives them the understanding that he is a magician. So they decide to ask him if he knows how to get out of the forest, to which the wizard tells them that he is a little busy to accompany them personally. Therefore he asks them to follow his friend, after which a skeleton appeared behind this magician's back. What scares the guys even more, and they literally faint from fear. Something like this is how Li Kan imagined dark magic. And in fact, all the first years had similar ideas about dark magic, like Li Kan. So they didn't quite understand why they even entered such a prestigious school to study dark magic, because they didn't understand why they needed it at all. But at that moment, Garcia spoke up, who said that she really understood their reaction very well, but she immediately wanted to point out that dark magic is a vast field with secrets and truth. According to a woman, she is like a polished diamond that before they choose their path, they must see and experience everything in this world, and dark magic is also included in this list. She wanted them to show her today the spirit of magicians who try their best to find the truth. After such a deep speech, Garcia decided to ask if anyone wants to be an assistant in this lesson. But in response, she heard only silence, although Li Kan again decided to stand out, and had already begun to raise his hand to propose his candidacy. Gainanato came to the rescue in time and literally nailed Li Kan's head to the desk so that he wouldn't even think about going there as an assistant, because the prince believed that if he hung out with the dark magician, then one fine day he would become one of his minions. Lee Khan was only thinking in his head at that moment that he always felt that dark magicians are akin to a hidden diamond, and it is easier to get good grades when the competition is much lower. So he answered Gainando that he was overreacting to all this. After which he began to get up and at the same time said that in fact, being a dark magician is not so bad, because unpopular directions like this make a student's life easier in the future. Therefore, he was confidently ready to become an assistant in this lesson. Garcia did not doubt for a second her beloved student that it was he who volunteered to help when everyone was hiding. Li Han actually understood professors very well, after all. He only needed to remember how his teacher from his previous life also worried when students did not give feedback after he barely managed to attract them to the lecture. While Li Khan was descending, he also had a feeling of incredible cold, and therefore he wanted to know the reason for this. Although he guessed what was going on when he simply looked at the teacher of dark magic, who was emitting an incredibly huge amount of negative mana. Li Han knew that initially mana has no attribute, but this changes depending on the element chosen by the magician, and cold mana is the hallmark of a dark magician. And as was known, this is one of the main reasons for the unpopularity of this direction. Mortem himself, looking at Li Khan, noticed that the guy simply had a huge amount of mana, something he had not seen for a long time. And to begin with, Mortem decided to show Li Khan how it's done. After which he cast a spell and literally summoned several servants who rose from the ground. This quite obviously scared all the kids who were in the lecture hall. They literally immediately started screaming and asking the professor to do something to them. But the professor's speech was not over, because at one moment these servants began to walk in a circle. And at this stage, Mortem wanted to know Li Khan's opinion, because he prepared this speech specifically for students. How can he have such control? Li Han actually liked this performance. He found it entertaining. Garcia at that time was so grateful to the guy for agreeing to help. But according to Mortem, this was just the beginning and now it's time to move on from cute tricks to more serious things. After which all these servants simply disappeared as if they were not there. Li Khan at that moment understood perfectly well that the professor apparently did everything so carefully so that the guy could also repeat something similar. But as soon as Li Han thought about it, the professor seemed to read his thoughts and said that he really shouldn't worry about it, because he wouldn't perform this spell because it was too difficult for a beginner. First, the professor asked him to perform an easier task, namely to endow mana with negative energy. Mages have to go through a lot of trials and errors to visualize their yin element, since it is a rather vague and large-scale concept. When thinking about cold, it becomes the element of ice. When thinking about darkness, it becomes the element of darkness. And it is indeed very difficult to comprehend the principle of the element. And while Lian tried to do this, Garcia decided to check how the other students would behave. But before she had time to do anything, she suddenly noticed that Li Khan managed to do it literally on the first try, which really amazed her. After all, it seemed to her that it was simply impossible to do it in just one attempt. Even the most talented magicians spent much more time on it. Li Khan himself understood perfectly well that all this was only due to the fact that he was living his second life, because it was enough for him to think about strange mathematical constructions to evoke this kind of energy. Mortem himself did not expect that someone would do it so well. But still he asked Li Khan to repeat it again, which the guy dealt with very easily and was again able to create dark energy without any problems. Even Garcia, who knew Li Khan's capabilities very well, was surprised by his abilities. And this actually began to worry her a little, because it seemed to her that he was simply too good. And this feeling quickly grew into her fear that the guy might switch to black magic because of this, and she under no circumstances could allow this, because the primary fear of every professor is losing a talented student. Even though Garcia was thinking at that moment, and not really about that. But when she saw that Li Khan began to progress in dark magic literally before everyone's eyes, she realized that things were already much worse for her. The guy at that moment tried to clarify with the professor how long he needed to continue doing this. Mortem did not answer him for some time, and then with a crazy look he told Li Khan to do this as much as he could. Li Khan immediately noticed that the professor's gaze had become so crazy, and it was starting to scare him a little. Garcia also carefully watched Professor Mortem, who was too happy, and she did not expect to see this, because it seemed to her that he would simply show the basic techniques of dark magic, and that would be the end of it. But apparently everything had gone too far. Therefore she began to think about stopping him, because colossal waves of negative energy were beginning to affect the students, and this was not at all good. But first, she would like to ask Professor Mortem what the next task will be. Mortem told her that he was actually much more interested in seeing what this guy's limit was, but Garcia immediately suggested that he find out another time. The man wanted to turn around and say that it would be better to do it now, but Garcia came closer to him and politely hinted that it would be better to do it next time, after which he had no more questions. At this time, Li Khan again turned to the professor with a question in which he would like to find out what he should do with this mana. The professor immediately gave him an answer. in which he asked Likan to wave his wand and say the word paralysis. Mordom wanted Lihan to use a low-level paralysis curse, which is a basic dark magic ability that creates a numb sensation in an arm or leg, causing it to become slightly numb. Likan knew all this very well and therefore asked a rather logical question about who he should use this spell on, because unlike other spells, a specific target is required. The professor was surprised that Lihan did not immediately understand that he needed to use this spell on him. The guy was surprised that the professor was ready to experience something like that on himself. But on the other hand, he immediately noticed how all the other guys breathed a sigh of relief. Likan actually always wanted to use magic on the professor, but not such a serious curse, although the professor insisted on this and asked Lihan not to hesitate and do it immediately. Mordom at that moment was sure that the paralysis that a first year could cause would not do anything to him. But when Likan saw how easily he could block it, he would understand how strong the dark magic was. Likan was incredibly happy about this and immediately promised that he would try his best to live up to expectations. Mordom could only offer him to learn this if he wanted. That's exactly what was in the professor's head, and it seemed to him that this is how Likan would react after that, how the spell won't work. The guy himself at that moment tried to concentrate all the mana in his hands and do everything so that he would succeed in this spell. Garcia immediately noticed that Lihan was gathering too much mana around herself, so it was obvious that she began to worry about it. But it was already too late to stop this madness, because Likan uttered the words of the spell and directed them at the professor, which at one moment felt a rather unpleasant feeling of cold throughout his body, which was not at all the result he expected. After which the man simply fell to the floor due to the fact that the spell was much stronger than he imagined in his head. Likan immediately ran up to the professor and wanted to help him, because he realized what he had done. But at first the man did not even react to his words, and it was clear from his face why. The guy immediately had thoughts in his head that he would be accused of destroying the professor, and for this he would be put in a punishment room for life. But his thoughts were suddenly interrupted when the professor began to get up on his own. And then he stood up as if nothing had happened and addressed the whole class with the words that this is exactly what low-rank paralysis looks like. He also simply couldn't help but praise Lihan, because the guy really did a very good job, in fact. Likan breathed a sigh of relief, because it was clear that the man was just pretending to defuse the situation, which means that prison was not waiting for him. But Garcia didn't think so, because she believed that Professor Mordom was hit by a very large amount of mana. But even his defense could not resist, and this was quite strange for her. To do this, she decided to come closer to him, and as soon as she did this, she immediately noticed how he was hiding his hand behind his back, which was literally trembling from the spell. Now she was sure that the professor was not actually pretending at all, and that the spell really had an effect on him. And this means that such an experienced professor still fell from the first-year spell. Of course, she couldn't tell this in front of the students, so she just listened to the professor praising Likan for his talent for black magic. The guy thanked him, but the professor decided to repeat it again. Only this time, he said it with a different expression, which made Lihan think that the professor was saying all this with sarcasm. Likan even thought for a moment that he was too bad, but the professor cannot tell him this in front of all the students. His thoughts did not end there and continued to think that if he were really good, he would hardly have been accepted into the first year. So most likely the professor is right and he is just a non-entity. Garcia at that moment turned to other students with the words that dark magic is actually much more diverse than what they saw, because in her opinion, low-level curses are not difficult to learn, but they themselves are quite effective. Therefore, if they can learn them, then they will probably need them in the future. But first of all, she asked them to think that they will need them not for intimidation, but for protection. She also did not forget to add that the best way to understand how to counter any kind of magic is to study it yourself, so she tried to convey to them that they should study different types of magic, which they completely agreed with her. Well, now that they understood everything, Garcia decided to perform a mass teleportation spell. The guys didn't even have time to blink an eye when they found themselves in a completely different place, where it seemed they had already been before. As it turned out, it was a training ground, where Garcia successfully transported them. After which she teleported herself, and as soon as she did this, she immediately began to talk about how they would now train with each other. So she decided to move them to where there was more space to make it more convenient for them to train. This was actually good news for the guys, and they were ready to begin this test. Likan also noticed that the atmosphere became livelier and the students more proactive than at the beginning of the lesson. And of course, Professor Garcia was to blame for all this. For a guy at that moment, she was simply amazing. Sometime later, Lihan told his partner that he hoped that their training would be productive. And his opponent today was Gainando, who was also ready for anything. The rules of this battle are quite simple. For starters, they will attack in turns. But the point is not this. but the point is to get hit by the curse and feel it on yourself. So Gainando decided to convert the mana into a negative element. Lee Khan was surprised that Gainando coped with this task so quickly, because one could remember what problems he had with other elements. It was strange to think about it, but it seemed to Lee Han that Gainando had a talent for dark magic. Well, or there was actually a second option, that this magic was too simple, but Lee Khan doubted this more. Professor Moram paid most attention to the couple Lee Khan and Gainando. And what was his surprise when he saw that Gainando also has talent in dark magic? Are two students really that capable in this class? Finally, Gainando gathered all the mana into his hands and cast the cherished spell, which he directed directly at Lee Khan. The guy felt the same chill throughout his body as the professor, and now Lee Khan roughly understands what this feeling is like. Gainando was incredibly happy that he was able to do it, and on the first try. But then he noticed that Lee Han looked as usual, so he would like to know from him where he felt the numbness. Lee Khan wasn't sure, but it didn't seem like he was paralyzed anywhere. Gainando was upset because of this. It seemed to him that the problem was in his magic. Apparently, he still couldn't do it. But Lee Khan believed that the problem was more likely in the spell itself, and not in the magic. Then he added that in his opinion, Gainando was holding back too much when using it, so he suggested that Gainando put in more effort. They were about to try again when Garcia suddenly stopped them, after which she came closer to them and assured Gainando that he had actually succeeded. It's just that Lee Khan has too much mana, so the effect is cancelled, and Gainando himself, in her opinion, did an excellent job. And yet the guy thought that this had no effect on Lee Khan at all, and this made him think that perhaps he did not have a predisposition to dark magic after all. Although on the other hand, it still wasn't important to him because he wasn't going to do this dark magic anyway, and now it was his turn to get hit. Lee Khan began to focus on control, because he understood that in the case of Gainando, he could not use too much mana. He roughly believed that it was necessary to use as little as possible so as not to harm the guy. Professor Mortis did not even expect that Lee Han would be so talented and it would be so easy for him to use this spell. After all, the man understood that in fact the whole point of this spell is that the longer it is, the easier it is to use, and it is very difficult to make a spell so short. And even if we are talking about low-level curses, the professor still could not believe that Lee Han learned this with first time. And as soon as Lee Han used this spell on Gainando, the guy not only felt cold, but his body literally froze in place. At the last moment, Gainando simply fell to the floor, and it turned out that he dodged the main spell. Lee Khan didn't understand why this guy did this, because he obviously shouldn't have shied away. Gainando immediately started getting angry and yelling at him because he actually did it on instinct. These words made the professor think, and this word instinctively literally repeated itself several times in his head. And the whole point was that he noticed how Gainando not only uses the spell incredibly quickly, but can also clearly detect the mana of the negative element. Therefore, now he wanted to immediately find out the name of this guy, because he believed that Gainando had a talent for dark magic. Moreover, Mortem believed that the guy was like a genius who appears only once every 10 years, or even less often. As a result, this lesson ended without any incidents. Each one sent curses at the other and received them in return. The guys actually had a great time. Garcia was also very happy that they all enjoyed it so much, and so she suggested that Professor Mortem should be applauded for his contribution to their class. After which she asked hopefully if they were all interested in dark magic. But from their faces it was obvious that as entertainment this was not bad, but as a main activity it was not a little close to them. Garcia realized this and asked Professor Mortem to tell them something before he left. The man actually wanted to say that he believed that today they had mastered the spells of dark magic, and it seemed that some students had already shown interest in it, or so it seemed to him. The guys didn't quite understand what he was talking about because dark magic had never interested them. Gainando absolutely agreed with these guys. He thought that this professor was so funny because who would like dark magic? And especially the professor would like to draw attention to this student, whose name seems to be Gainando. He would like to ask him to visit his workshop. Gainando clearly did not expect such a turn of events and therefore did not know how to respond to something like that. But still, he found the courage and asked the professor what did he do wrong? The professor did not answer this question, but simply pointed his finger at Lee Khan and asked the guy to also come to his workshop. Lee Khan himself was not entirely against this, because he understood that it was important for him to get grades now, and dark magic is well suited for this, so he happily agreed to it. The magician's workshop is similar to a research laboratory, where students conduct research on topics in which the professors are interested without any rest. At home, Lee Khan heard many similar stories, and it seemed to him that such hell did not exist on Earth, and that these were all just fairy tales. But today he realized that in fact he was mistaken, and apparently he would have to visit such a place, although he still hoped that this was just time for a consultation. And with such hopes they came to Professor Mortem's workshop, which was located in a black stone tower. The guys only needed one glance to understand that they were studying here at all. because there were skeletons and graves everywhere. Gainando was still worried that he had done something wrong, since the professor called him to his place, but Likan tried to calm him down and tell him that perhaps it was not that he had done something wrong. But this only angered Gainando even more, because it seemed to him that he had probably angered him with something, because in his head, it was like all dark magicians quickly get irritated. Likan, most of all, did not want to listen to his whining, so he asked him to finish and just follow him, after which he carefully opened the doors to this dark laboratory. They entered the building after the doors literally opened on their own, and this already scared Gainando incredibly. Likan was absolutely calm. All that bothered him was that he simply couldn't see anything because of the smoke, and therefore for quite a long time they could not find the professor himself to talk to him. The man, meanwhile, was sitting in his office and immediately heard that the guys had finally arrived. Therefore, he decided to send Dayret for them and bring them here. But the assistant was against this idea, because he knew very well that the director forbade the man to get close to new students. Mortem completely forgot about it, but today he didn't care too much about it, and so he decided that it would be best to keep it all in secret. But this only displeased his assistant even more, who decided to remind the man that he had just left from a prison cell. The professor reminded him that this was not a prison cell at all, but a punishment room. In any case, he understood Dareth and ordered him to return, and he could handle the guys himself. After one wave of the magic wand, a bright light suddenly appeared in front of the guys, which the professor created to make it much easier for them to get to him. A few seconds later, all this fog and darkness suddenly disappeared, and Likan noticed that now this place looks much better. But still he was embarrassed by one fact that all the furniture that was there was made of bones, which was still a little scary. For dark magicians who can control summoned skeletons, furniture made from bones is the most desirable thing after objects. In any case, all these thoughts had to be interrupted after the professor greeted them. They did the same in response, and immediately after that he invited them to sit down at the table. Gainando exhaled a little when the light appeared in this room, but according to Lihan, he reacts so well only because he does not understand that everything around here is made of bones. In any case, it's time to get down to business, and the professor decided to ask them what they think. Why did he call them here in the first place? Gainando decided that he knew the answer to this question, so he decided to say himself that the professor called them here because the guy did something wrong in class. But this answer was completely wrong, because in fact the man called them because they both have a talent for dark magic, which made Gainando very happy. Although now the professor would like to ask again that Gainando just told him something, what he did there in class. But the guy asked to forgive him. It came out by accident. Now Gainando had strange thoughts in his head, because he had never in his life heard that he had talent for something. He decided to ask Likan, or did he also hear the professor tell him that the guy had exceptional talent? But Likan immediately told him that the professor didn't say anything about exceptional talent. In any case, Gainando now doesn't know what to do next, because dark magic doesn't interest him at all, but he's very talented at it. To soften the tense situation a little, the man offered them some sweets. And then he added again that they both have talent in dark magic, so he invited them to talk about it, because black magic is much more interesting than it might seem to them at first glance. And of this, he was 100% sure. For Likan, such phrases were quite typical, and they were used wherever people wanted to attract at least some attention to themselves and their business. The guy knew very well that there are professors in popular fields, and they are so proud of it that they don't even want to teach students until they reach a certain level of knowledge. But then it's worth thinking about how to be unpopular with professors who would like at least someone to come to their classes. And at the moment, Lihan actually felt this way because he could feel the professor's despair that the subject was not popular. But Gainando didn't even think about this, who still couldn't believe that he was a sought-after genius who didn't even know what to do next. Likan at that moment was thinking about what they should do with those bones that the professor gave them, because he not only didn't tell them what to do with them, he also asked them to keep this strange gift until they came to their rooms. No matter how Likan tried to ask the professor what it was, no one gave him an answer. The guy thought that these bones that they were holding in their hands could be similar to the book that the director slipped him, although he did not rule out the possibility that the man wanted to get closer to them and therefore gave them an unknown artifact. This is something like surprises in a relationship. This analogy, which Likan came up with himself, immediately became incredibly terrible for him, but he simply did not see any other option. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by Gainando, who asked Likan not to say anything to Yenna. Likan understood that Gainando was probably worried that people might start teasing him for his words about how only servants do such things. Therefore, he promised Gainando that he would remain silent, because they were still friends after all. Although in his mind he thought that first of all he would tell Yenna everything, because they were also good friends with him. During a fencing lesson, the professor forced all the kids to run until they fell from fatigue. He believed that only in this way could one train sufficiently good endurance, and he also asked them not to forget to inhale mana. The man made it clear to them that their main goal was to increase their physical abilities to the maximum, while continuously circulating mana. There are countless ways to use mana. One of them is to circulate it throughout the body to make it stronger and more resilient. However, this is too advanced a technique for guys who have not previously prepared their body for such loads. While they were running, Lee Khan decided to ask one question to the professor, who was ready to listen to him. Lee Khan told him that he had something important to do in the mountains, and he would like to ask the man to give him some advice. Should he go there, and how dangerous is it? The man, without thinking for a long time, immediately began to tell him that there were not only many dangerous monsters there, but also other unknown dangers that even the professors did not know about. Therefore, he believes that it would be rather unwise to go to the mountains. Only a fool knowing this would go there. Lee Khan, in response to this, said that he would not go there of his own free will. He needed to go there for homework, to collect a couple of ingredients there. This made the professor smile, because if he does this for homework, then the situation is completely different. Lee Khan wanted to know the reason why then everything would be different. But in response, he only heard that the man noticed that the guy didn't look tired at all. Apparently, he managed to circulate mana. The guy responded to this by saying that this wasn't really the point. He believed that most likely he was just actively spending it, and since he had a lot of it, he simply couldn't get tired for a long time. To remove mana from the center of the body and circulate it throughout all its corners, you need to learn to control it. But Lee Khan uses a completely different method. He essentially pushes the mana that overwhelms him in all directions, which is not circulation, but rather boring. The professor thought about what he had heard about the guy doing something similar in the battle with the Twilight team. Normally, a person would pass out due to complete depletion of mana, as this is similar to losing all energy. However, if a guy has an unlimited amount of energy, then this method will only work for him alone. At least that's what the professor thought. And so he told Lee Khan directly that he would not ask him to use this method. However, in this lesson, he would like Lee Khan to at least try to focus on the circulation of mana. The guy understood him perfectly, and it seemed to him that he was doing something dangerous since the man was telling him about this. And at that moment, the professor decided to add that since he had so much mana, he would have to make more efforts to complete the circulation circle. Lee Khan didn't quite understand what the man was getting at and what he would have to do now. But his worst thoughts nevertheless came true, and the professor told him that right now, he would increase the volume of his training so that it would not seem so easy to him. And to begin with, the professor asked him to run at least 10 more laps, and then they would talk to him. Leon was obviously not happy to hear something like that in his direction, and he didn't understand why all the professors behaved like this. Finally, after Lee Khan finished running in useless circles, the professor came up to him and said that when he finally decides to go to the mountains to do his homework, he will go with the guy. This surprised Lee Khan quite a lot, because according to him, it's safe there if it's homework. The man did not deny what was said, but still assured him that he just liked to walk there. That's why he wanted to walk with Lee Khan, although in his mind he thought that something unexpected could happen there, so he should still go together with the guy. Yana carefully read the letter from Professor Urgulm, in which the man wrote that he needed to go away on business, so while he was away, he allowed him to take everything he needed. Now the girl understood why Lee Khan asked her to come here, because there are a lot of chemical things here. Lee Khan completely agreed with her, but most of all he wanted to check the benefits of the potions that he had. And since Ina understands much more about alchemy, he decided to ask her to help with this matter, and the girl actually didn't mind helping, because she was also interested in seeing what would come of it. When suddenly she noticed a small farm in the backyard, and immediately decided to ask Lee Khan if he raised her. The guy answered quite confidently that these were his plants, but also immediately noticed that this was just the beginning, because he thought it would take another couple of months for everything to sprout. But Yenna assured him that it seemed to her that everything had already grown. Lee Khan didn't quite understand what she was talking about, so he went to the window to look and saw that everything had really already grown there, and it was literally a ready-made harvest. He immediately began to have doubts about the fact that this was exactly the plant that he had planted, because he simply didn't understand how it managed to grow so quickly. Lee Khan decided to tell Yenna that most likely the professor added a growth accelerator to the watering can, because he is such an impatient man. Although in fact he had a good idea that the reason was completely different. But Lee Khan still didn't know about it for sure. In any case, the guys decided that since it had grown, they could collect it, and Yenna asked to leave this task to her. After the two took the food and alchemical equipment they needed, they set off on the road, leaving a note in which they thanked Professor Urglem, who in turn would only find out over time how much the guys actually took with them. The next morning, they realized that they were so carried away that they didn't even understand how they had been sitting at this activity all night. And the result of this sleepless night was that the grape wine of the Western Empire is delicious, and after drinking the potion from Calacanthus, a person will be able to sing as beautifully as a mermaid. That's all. They were able to deal with only these 2 items in the whole night. Yenna was upset that they were only able to identify 2 of them, but Lihan still thought that this was a good result. Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted by Asan, who appeared out of nowhere and wished them good morning. He was in a great mood because today they could finally go get the ingredients. Looking at Likan, it was impossible to say that they were ready, but still he replied that they could move forward. The thing was that they agreed on this weekend, that they would finish it on Saturday and return with the rest of the students. And on Sunday he uses this card to finally get out. But for now he could not rejoice as he wanted, because inside he was still worried about the traps that were already waiting for him. Suddenly Asan approached him, who suggested that Likan look at the black market before going into the forest, and in fact the guy was interested in this offer. A few minutes later they were already on the territory of this market. And for Likan it was surprising that it really existed, because in what school could one find a black market? Although it is still similar in size to the one that opens during the 5-day festival in the village. Suddenly, among all these people who were in this market, Lycon saw a rather familiar face. It was Ratford who invited everyone to play a game in which they had to find the Emperor among 3 cards, and if they could do this, he would double their bet. But as soon as he saw Lycon, he immediately jumped up from his seat to approach him. Other students who heard that Lycon Vardanaz was here immediately ran away in which direction, although the guy himself mentally asked them not to be afraid of him, because he was not going to do anything bad to them. In any case, he decided to talk to Ratford and ask him what he was doing. In response, he said that he was collecting bread. Lycon didn't quite understand what he meant, so he asked him to explain what it meant. Bread in this place is the currency, 5 loaves is 1 goose feather, 10 is a sugar cube the size of a matchbox. Thanks to Lycon, the Blue Dragon students get enough food, but in other towers things are completely different. They are fighting for survival. While Yenna began to look around little by little, Lycon thought about what was possible, and it wouldn't hurt him to do so. After all, there are actually quite a lot of useful things here, which was actually quite unexpected for him. The only negative is that there was not enough food. There were also a lot of items for daily use, but what is most surprising is that it is full of artifacts that Lycon needs so much. An item that an ordinary person will never see in his life is an artifact, however. They are located in Einrogard, and there are a lot of those who have various talents and create artifacts that are usable, although they are a little low grade. While walking through this market, Lycon noticed one very interesting fact for himself. If he were part of a black turtle, then it would actually be easier for him to talk to them. But today Ratford was with him, who spoke instead of Lahan with all the sellers, which made them very angry. At some point, Lycon noticed some kind of cloak and wanted to know about its abilities. Ratford told him that this cloak has the effect of protecting the wearer from sharp objects, but the success rate is only 50%. Even under such conditions, Leon felt that this cloak would be very useful for them. In response to Ratford, I can only praise him for the fact that Lahan is truly incredible. Just a living example of an aristocrat who looks at everything from the positive side. Lihan asked him to stop with these words, although he was pleased to hear them. But what upset him most was that, as Ratford said, there are few useful things here. He simply cannot know what effect most of them have, and judging by the way some are losing their mana, their service life is coming to an end. Therefore, out of everything that was here, this raincoat was a pretty good option to buy. But Lycon wanted to buy it for a reason, but asked the seller to sell him this cloak on credit, to which the seller asked him without these tricks. In this case, Lihan said that he brought various products because he heard that it is possible to change in this market. He was quite curious to find out whether such products were suitable for exchange, or should he still grab canned food. But as soon as he showed this food, everyone immediately ran up to him and began offering various exchanges for his food. At first, Lycon decided that he would take his cloak in exchange for 2 potatoes, after which they began to offer him some spears and similar weapons in exchange for his products. As soon as Lycon gave this guy the potatoes, other students also immediately started running after him, offering him to exchange a piece of potatoes for bread. But he immediately told them that they were not for sale. He immediately abandoned his shop with goods and went to fry it over the fire, and he did it quite quickly. Lycon, looking at all this, didn't understand them a little. Were they all really that hungry? Although seeing how this guy eats these potatoes, he understood that apparently this is so. Now Lycon understood how much these guys were suffering without food, and his basket of food was simply something incredible. Therefore, he decided to ask Ina to help him a little here. After which he turned to the rest of the guys and asked them to free up some space for him so that he could prepare food for them, and today it would be free for them. This was something out of fantasy for them, so they simply behaved like animals, but he tried to the end to calm them down. In fact, Lyhan had the idea in his head that since these guys had been starving for a long time, they could become for him and Yenna a pretty good base of new customers who would buy food from them in the future. So he decided to use his culinary skills again to feed all these guys. and given what he had in his basket, he prepared tomato stew for them, which the guys literally drank like water and didn't care at all that it was so hot. Yenna noticed that they were eating well, but for Lee Khan this was not at all surprising because they were very hungry, and mentally he tried to convince himself that even though these products were valuable, such an action seemed right to him, because it would most likely play into his hands in the future, especially considering the idea that he would soon have to collect the ingredients with them. So Lee Han believed that he needed to improve relations with the Black Turtle students who were afraid of him. He could benefit more if he could change their opinion of him, or so it seemed to Lee Khan himself. After such a dinner, Lee Khan received what seemed to him to be a lot of different items. It seemed that they treated him too kindly, because all these artifacts from the turtles, he received many times more than he had expected before. Low-level stealth boots reduced the volume of footsteps, and in addition to this, he received smokescreen chalks, which can be broken to create a smokescreen. It was also worth noting that Lee Han had a detection bracelet in his pocket, which detects when he is being watched. The stone on the bracelet will glow red if this happens. But still, Lee Khan, looking at all these things, knew that the senior students did this, and therefore he only had one question. Why did the senior students do this? All the effects, oddly enough, are aimed at hiding, but they are not forbidden to go out, and the fact that they create such things at all really bothered Lee Khan. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted after Yenna told him that there was something moving in the bag, and asked Lee Khan to check what he had there. The guy turned his head and saw a skeleton's hand there, which scared him a little.
Radford immediately began screaming and begging not to tell him that those bastards decided to repay them for their kindness.
Lee Khan was about to throw this bag off of him, but suddenly he noticed the very bone that Professor Mortem had given him coming out of his pocket. Therefore, he asked the guys to stop where they were and not to approach him, after which he watched the picture as that same bone connected with the one that came out of his bag, and in fact they complemented each other perfectly. Yenna didn't even understand why Lee Khan carries an extra bone with her, but Lee Khan immediately told her that Professor Mortem had given him this bone, saying that it would definitely be useful to them. Before the guy could finish speaking, this bone flew closer to him and literally pierced his skin to get to his blood. The guy didn't understand what was happening, but even considering the fact that he was in incredible pain, he still didn't run away and behaved quite calmly. At that moment, Lee Khan had a rather strange feeling as if this hand should obey him. And as soon as he decided to test this theory, he immediately realized that he was right, because these bones did absolutely everything that he told them. Yenna and Radford, who were standing behind, simply did not understand what was happening. Was Lee Han really using dark magic right now, which was helping him collect these bones? The guy told them that when they went to his laboratory, the professor gave them a rather strange thing that, for some unknown reason, stuck to him. Ina nevertheless decided to come closer and suggested that the guy throw this thing away after all. This bone seemed to look at Ina, after which it hid in Lee Han's jacket, so the girl realized that it would be better to take back her words. After which Radford approached him, who told Lee Khan that in the world of magicians, they say that you should not mess with dark magicians, and besides, this bone seemed too gloomy to him. Lee Khan listened to them carefully, and finally replied that after their comments, he began to think sensibly. In his opinion, she really looked very strange, but he had a feeling that everything was not as bad as it seemed at first glance. Yenna had a question why the professor gave them something like that, but Lee Khan didn't know the answer to this question. Moreover, he was worried about another one. Why only a part? Radford suggested that perhaps the professor wanted Lee Han to look for other parts and collect them, but for Yenna this was too funny a joke. But, looking at Lee Khan's face, who thought that this actually sounded quite convincing, she began to think that this was not so stupid after all. The professor thinks differently than other people when they think that no one will like the collection of bones. The man has a completely different opinion who thinks that they wouldn't actually mind looking for bones. Such thoughts even gave Lee Khan goosebumps when he thought about what motivated the professor. In any case, the guy decided that he would keep these bones for himself for now, because it did not seem to him that they could harm him. The next day, all 4 towers gathered and planned to go to the mountains to get herbs for their alchemy homework. And before setting off, the fencing professor gave instructions in which he said that the first and second priority is safety, because in these mountains, there are dangers unknown to them. He would like students from the same towers to get together, and then remember each other's faces and the number of people present. All this was necessary, according to him, in order to regularly check their presence in the group. This caused the guys a little panic, because now it seemed to them that it was really so dangerous there. Therefore, they decided that it would be better if they did not move away from each other at all, because it would be much safer. When everyone was warned, the professor decided that it was time to actually set off, so he asked them to follow him and try to keep up. After some time, they arrived at a place that, as it seemed to the professor, would be ideal for them to collect the herbs they needed, which they began to do. At that moment, He himself thought that everything seemed to be going well, so he decided that they would continue in the same spirit until they got out of here. Suddenly, he heard a strange sound, and when he turned around, he saw the huge hands of the Lich, which closed the professor inside before he had time to say even one word, after which he magically simply disappeared from this field. One of the students decided to ask the professor a question, and when she turned around to do so, she noticed that he had disappeared somewhere. Moreover, there were absolutely no traces left of him, which instantly caused the girl to panic. After which, she immediately began shouting to the other guys that the professor had simply disappeared and was no longer there. They all got together and tried to figure out what happened and where did he go. Lee Kun at that moment was thinking about how this could happen and how afraid he was of it. After all, looking at the other guys, they immediately began to panic because they simply did not know what to do in this situation. He had to immediately ask them to calm down first and not fuss too much, because it might be that the professor just walked away. Although he himself understood perfectly well that this was definitely not the case, and the professor most likely really disappeared, but he somehow needed to console them. Besides, on the other side they weren't lost, and there were no monsters visible, so he didn't see any particular reason to panic. They just needed to go back. But as soon as he suggested this to them, at that very second it began to rain, which turned into a heavy downpour. And how good it was for Lee Kun to think that he had taken various things for unforeseen situations, although even he could not think that Professor Ingerdell could disappear, when suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by the same Knight of Her Highness, who approached Lee Kun to thank his help. And he was also quite interested to know if the story that Lee Kun cooked the legendary stew in the Turtle Tower was true. Lee Kun pretended that he didn't understand what he was talking about, although in his mind he couldn't believe that the guys from the Turtle Tower had made his stew into a legendary dish in their gossip. The guy did not ask Lee Han any more about this, but simply went back to the princess to inform her that all this was just baseless gossip. But their conversation did not end there, because Her Highness's knight again ran up to Lee Kun with the words that Her Highness wanted to help him. But the guy did not understand why she herself could not tell him this, but still did not refuse her help. First of all, Lee Kun needed someone to light a fire, and so he asked this messenger to convey this to Her Highness. At that very second, he approached the princess and told her about it. She agreed to help without any problems, so in a matter of minutes she prepared to make a fire, and after a few seconds it was already burning. Laihan didn't expect that the princess had advanced so much in magic. Could she really be using spirits in her magic? And the guy was not the only one who was so surprised. The other guys were also surprised, because they had not yet learned to summon spirits. Had she really learned this herself? At that moment, Lee Kun thought that if he had called on his bones, they would have reacted differently. In any case, the main thing was that the princess was able to light a fire and now they are much warmer and more comfortable here. But before they had time to warm up properly, they all suddenly heard a very strange sound. Lee Kun immediately realized that this was clearly some kind of danger that was approaching right towards them, so he jumped up from his seat. And as soon as he turned around, he saw just a huge monster peeking out at them from behind the trees. Before Lee Kun had time to say anything, suddenly a Knight of Her Highness shouted among them all, who immediately said that they could not move, because golems follow the rules, and if they do not attack first, he will not touch them. Golems are creatures artificially created by magicians, which are not similar to natural monsters. They are creatures molded from certain materials in which a magical core is built in. Problems begin when the core is damaged or destroyed, and then combined with other items, because it can become a golem that does not obey orders. But fortunately, even the damaged golem follows the rules, although Li Han still did everything to prepare for battle. After all, the rule may turn out to be something like, destroy all the students who are currently in the forest. Suddenly, this golem stopped in place and decided to draw a line. The guys did not understand what he was doing at the moment, but they guessed that perhaps he was telling them not to cross it. Everyone stood straight and tried not to move, but Lee Kun decided that he needed to check what would happen if he crossed this line. So Asen immediately tried to stop him, who literally begged him not to do this. But the guy asked his friend to calm down because he didn't say that he was going to do it on his own, after which he carefully took out the bones that he managed to collect from his inner pocket. Asen immediately wanted to know what kind of horror this was, to which Lee Kun confidently replied that it was a summoned monster that accidentally fell into his hands. Lee Kun put the bones on the floor, and immediately ordered them to cross the line that the golem had drawn. As soon as the bones carried out Lee Kun's order, the golem immediately struck a blow that literally crushed them. But now Lee Kun and the others know perfectly well what will happen if you cross this line. The golem will simply attack. The guy felt a little sorry for his bones, but they turned out to be capable of fairly rapid regeneration, and after a few minutes they were absolutely like new. Then Lee Kun called them back to him, and did not forget to praise them for a job well done. The princess's knight still couldn't understand what had just happened. Could the summoned monster be able to recover so quickly? But what surprised him most was that resummoning a monster required a colossal amount of mana and time. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by someone's scream, and when he turned around, he saw how the other guys were literally getting ready to fight, so the guy immediately ran to dismantle them. But as soon as he came closer, he received a blow right in the face, and they also did not forget to tell him that he was not from their tower, and it was better for him not to interfere in their conversation at all now. Nilya decided not to interfere and immediately approached Likan, who said that it seemed to her that he should stop the fight between these guys. But he ignored her until she grabbed him by his robe and started shaking him so that he finally came to his senses, because she didn't understand what he was thinking so hard about. Lihan asked her forgiveness, after which he added that he actually had one idea that might help them get out of this situation. As soon as the guys heard this, they were immediately happy and stopped fighting. Although on the other hand, according to them, they had no doubt that he would save them. After all these useless praises, Lihan told them that it seemed to him that all this was just a trap of the professor, who was in cahoots with the director. They definitely didn't expect this, and it was quite clearly visible on their faces. Professor Ingerdell, as soon as the director teleported him, immediately began to tell him that kidnapping his own friend, and also a professor of the academy, was too low and demanded that they immediately release him. The director, in response, only asked him to calm down and listen to their arguments on this matter, because he was confident that he would definitely understand them, and everything would be fine, to which Ingerdell successfully agreed. After which the Lich began to say that if there is such a strong and reliable swordsman like him next to the students, then the students will lose the opportunity to grow on their own. Ingerdell, listening to the director, simply could not believe that he was telling him such nonsense in such a serious tone. But the director did not listen to him and simply continued to talk further until he got to the point where he asked the professor to believe him, because one day it seemed to him that he would understand why he did this. Ingerdell, in fact, already understood everything perfectly well, but he would even more like to know from the director what he would do if something unexpected happened. This question made Professor Erglum and the director go into a stupor, and they simply did not know how to answer this question. Therefore, they decided to say that they are confident in the students and believe that the guys will definitely be able to cope. This put Ingerdell even more in a state of shock, because how can they even be sure of this? However, in the end, Ingerdell could not stand it and said that if something really bad happened, he would immediately intervene and prevent the accident. The director was not against it and told the professor that then he could do whatever he wanted, and after they finally agreed, the director let the man go. The director also considered it appropriate to add that soon the professor would understand what happiness it is to watch someone else's growth. But Ingerdell didn't even want to listen to all this, so he finally asked the director to be silent. After which he turned directly to Ergulum and would like to find out from him what they placed in the forest. To this question, the professor laughed and said that in fact there was nothing wrong, they only placed a bull there, which was enhanced with elixirs. He is a little wilder than a normal bull, but this is not a big problem, and they were sure of that. After Likan's assumption, the guys began to think that perhaps Professor Ingordella was probably in cahoots with them. It was all too cruel for them, and it seemed to them that the professors were already going too far with this. Nilya did not want to get involved in these conversations. She would rather find out what they would do. But Likan believed that even in this case the plans had not changed. He believed that first of all they needed to find a way to get rid of this huge golem, and then they would have a chance to get out of this forest unharmed. But looking at their facial expressions, he realized that he was apparently asking too much of them. So he asked them to cheer up, because he was pretty sure that this trap was planned and most likely there was a way around it. After these words, the guys agreed with him, because if this was really a trap of the director and professors, then they would hardly have abandoned them like that. They had not planned anything before. And in fact, Likan already had one idea that he would like to test, and perhaps this would be the solution to this problem. Some time passed, and the guys spent quite a long time discussing possible options that would help them get out of this situation. Nilya decided to ask Likan what he came up with and how he would solve this problem, but as soon as she turned in his direction, she realized that the guy had simply disappeared. And now even Nilya began to panic, so she decided to call the guys and tell them about it. They immediately decided that it had also been stolen, and some of them immediately decided that they needed to go through the golem and find it. Yenna asked them to calm down and look carefully in the direction of the golem, where Likan stood, who was gradually approaching the golem. Asen immediately started shouting at Likan to get out of there quickly, because if he stood there for too long, something bad might happen. But then they noticed that the golem didn't care at all about the guy and didn't react to him at all, as if Likan didn't exist at all. Asan and Yenna tried to ask him what happened, and most importantly, how did he end up there? Likan explained to them that he did it quite easily. He simply used the magic of invisibility. While the other students were confused, he decided to do a simple experiment. He wanted to see how the golem would react when it was invisible. And fortunately, the golem did not detect him, and Likan was able to pass this line quite easily, and also learn something else. that when the guy crossed the line in invisibility and then came out of it, the golem no longer paid any attention to him. The guys, hearing this, could not believe that he was already using the magic of invisibility. But Li Kan assured them that this was just the ability of an artifact, but this gave them even more of a pleasant shock that he had already learned how to create artifacts. But Li Kan immediately said that this artifact was given to him in the order of Preasing, which upset them a little, because they did not understand what he did in this order, and why was he involved in it in general. Yenna interrupted this stupid conversation and said that the main problem was that it would be difficult for them to use the order's artifact. And Nilya has already finished that in this case, they will have to come up with another way to get out of here. Asen immediately asked Li Kan to go ask the professor for help, but the guy himself believed that this would not work, because one of them set this trap. After which he told them that there was actually no point in doing this, because they would solve this problem in a slightly different way. Li Kan believed that if this was really the test that the professors handed them, then it should be of such difficulty that even first-year students could overcome it. Therefore he suggested that they all attack the golem's core together, with the help of which it moves. He also noted that if they can do this, they will finally put an end to this. After these words, he delivered a pretty good blow right to the head of this golem. The other students were so happy to have Li Han with them, and they kept telling him how wonderful he was. But Yenna suddenly noticed that Li Kan stopped and was drowned in his thoughts. At that moment, the guy thought that this was simply impossible, because at the moment when the iron ball hit the golem, his connection with him was severed. And the biggest problem is that the guy can't use the ball anymore. Li Han remembered that golems were monsters that moved through the mana emanating from their core, so it was natural that measures were taken to protect it. But Li Kan was not going to give up on this, and decided that since his ball did not work, he decided that he would try something else. Ingerdell, meanwhile, was sitting in the director's office and thinking only about what he would do if his student suddenly got hurt. The director noticed that the man was not himself, so he decided to tell him that in fact there is no need to worry so much, because they have everything under control. And if this calms him down, the director assured the man that in his days it was much worse. Professor Urgom decided to joke that the days of the director were literally ancient times. In any case, the director believed that this time there were a lot of interesting students, and he was confident that they would be able to overcome most of the obstacles that would confront them. But the most important thing is that Li Kan was with them, who, according to the director, will do everything to ensure that nothing serious happens to the guys. Therefore, he once again asked Ingerdell to stop worrying, and the best thing he can do now is enjoy the tea that Professor Urgom prepared. The director especially believed that they should not worry because Leon had already learned magic from his grimoire, which shocked the professors. Ingerdell couldn't just believe it, so he asked the director to repeat it again. The Lich didn't quite understand why they were so surprised by this, because in fact, he studied not only his grimoire, but Professor Vagrek also gives him personal lessons in combat magic. So everything will definitely be fine with this guy, and with him, with everyone else. But Urgom immediately noticed that he and Professor Vagrek did not go beyond the scope of the first-year program. The director immediately told him that this was not true, because Professor Vagrek had crossed this level long ago. And if the Lich has up-to-date information, then he and Li Kan have long since switched to the magic of the third circle. The number of circles depends on the complexity of the magic. The number of processes necessary to use magic is fixed. For example, on the first circle there will be the magic of the elements. On the second, the preservation of form. And on the third, there will be control of this magic. On the real third circle, a person will be able to do all these things at once. But if someone does them separately, then he is still far from reaching the third circle. Li Han had thoughts in his head that a water ball was weaker compared to a metal ball, although its shape was also difficult to maintain. Now he realized that he needed to think carefully about what to do next, because now the lives of many children depend on him. But he was pleased with the thought that he was practically sure that even these guys were not devoid of intelligence. Therefore, he was confident that there was definitely a way to solve this problem. Suddenly, Yenna burst into his thoughts and decided to find out why Li Han was spinning this ball of water. Li Kan understood that this actually happened unconsciously, because he had done this so many times. Suddenly, this thought turned into a plan in which he wanted to try to rotate the water ball quickly enough so that it would gain greater piercing power than after a simple throw. Thus, Li Kan will become a cowboy, and his water ball will look like a bullet that will fly out of a revolver. After many attempts, Li Han finally succeeded and was able to create a suitable water ball. His joy was interrupted by Yenna, who immediately said that she, of course, did not know what kind of magic this was. But still she decided to assume that this water ball was too big. And in fact, she was completely right, because Li Han created a water ball that matched the golem. The guys had already begun to discuss Li Kan's action. They simply did not understand what and where he studied. They even said that it might be much easier to leave the guy alone so that he could figure it out on his own. Asen burst into these sneaky dialogues and began to tell each of them that there was no reason to doubt that Lee Khan would not be able to cope with one spell. Nilya also joined in and added that Lee Khan is really capable of doing this, because at least he is not a weakling. While the guy himself was listening to this, he caught himself thinking that they were putting too much pressure on him when they were all saying this so confidently. Since ancient times, young magicians have said that magic is the perfect formula for the world, and if someone does whatever they want with it, they risk incurring wrath. The magic that Lee Khan invented belongs to the high level that students master in later years. Courses, they don't teach this to beginners. But Lee Khan has so much mana that he can ignore the usual formulas. When he used mana to maintain the rotation, the water ball could not withstand the amount of it and splashed out. Therefore, Lee Khan began to make the ball larger. As the size increased, the rotational force decreased, so he used more mana, repeating the process over and over again until he reached this state. And now that he has gone through all these processes, he can say with confidence that he can control this water ball and even more. But the main problem, which he did not tell the guys, was that he could only do this for very long, because it put a lot of pressure on his mind. Although even this problem only gave him more motivation to end this as soon as possible. Therefore, concentrating, he ordered this water ball to fly straight towards the golem. As soon as she launched this ball, she realized that she slightly missed getting where she wanted it, because this ball was definitely flying straight into the golem's shoulder, and if it didn't hit, the guy was unlikely to be able to create another one like it. The blow actually hit the shoulder, and from such a strong water stone, the golem crumbled into small pieces. The guy decided for a second that this would be the end of their fight. After all, looking at all this, it seemed that only small cobblestones remained from the golem. Moreover, other guys immediately started shouting that Lee Khan was the best magician on Earth, who was able to smash a golem, even with the help of ordinary water.
Nilya did not forget to note the most important thing is that she told them all about this.
Lee Khan wasn't as happy as the guys because he actually didn't fully understand whether the blow was so powerful, or whether the golem itself was simply too weak. But in any case, he decided that, be that as it may, Professor Varnitti's lessons were clearly beneficial for him. Although the consequences did not make the guy wait long, and after a few seconds his head began to spin, which meant that he had lost a lot of his strength, so the guys offered him help. The guy was all in his thoughts that since Professor Ingerdell did not return at that moment, then it was definitely a trap. The guy's bones suddenly came out of his robe and began to tremble, as if they were afraid of something, and Lee Khan didn't understand why they suddenly decided to behave this way. But when he turned back because he heard someone's screams, he understood why the bones were behaving this way, because a new golem was running towards the guys. This was already so funny for Lee Khan because they are of no use at all, they just run and scream. Nilya thought that now was not the best time to sigh and suggested that they split up so they could distract him and buy some time. They didn't mind and thought it was a really good idea, so they decided to quickly run away. But Lee Khan didn't have time to run far, because he was caught by Her Majesty's knight, who asked him to use the magic that he had just used. He even called this blow Eumedigus's water bullet. Lee Khan did not understand who he was talking about, and according to the knight, that was the name of the imperial magician, famous for the fact that he controlled water all his life. But Lee Khan still did not understand why the guy named his magic in honor of this emperor. In any case, Lee Khan immediately made him understand that this water ball would take too long to create, so he asked the knight to quickly run away from here, and Lee Khan himself was going to disappear into the night and destroy another golem, after which he took out from his hiding place the very chalk that is capable of creating a smoke screen and how he didn't want to use it right now. But the guy understood perfectly well that in fact he simply had no choice, so he did it without much thought. After the golem lost sight of him, Lee Khan took out his sword, with which he was ready to deliver the final blow. Lee Khan immediately decided that after he had blinded him, the best option would be to aim for his legs. After all, it was obvious, at least for Lee Khan, that the golem would not be able to maintain balance with such a huge weight. Suddenly, after such another blow, Lee Khan noticed a body jumping out from the area of the golem's head, and literally a second later, a man landed next to him, who also turned out to be a student at the academy, and it was obvious from his face that he was very scared. Not even a few seconds had passed before this frightened guy jumped into Lee Khan's arms, although he didn't see Lee Khan himself, so he became even more scared because he didn't understand where this voice was coming from. Lee Khan decided to let this guy go, and he rather unexpectedly asked into the void, or whether Vardanaz had just held him, which surprised Lee Khan, because he didn't even know how this guy guessed about it. But this student replied that it was actually quite obvious, because the only one who can fight the golem is Vardanaz. In any case, he was quite grateful to Lee Khan for his help. Before he could finish these words of gratitude, the golem woke up again and tried to strike, but Lee Khan reacted quite in time. There wasn't much time, so Lee Khan immediately began asking the guy about how he ended up here in the first place, because the golem was too dense to break through. The student told him that he used a clay-dissolving potion according to Siana's recipe. Lekan was quite interested in listening to all this, because he actually didn't even know that such a thing existed. But in any case, he firmly decided that he could defeat this monster if everything went well. But first, he needed to take some of this potion, which this student used. But according to the guy, unfortunately, he ran out of it. Lekan was not surprised that this guy would be of no use either. But most of all, he was surprised that no one was attacking them anymore, as if the golem was simply not interested. Moreover, this monster simply goes in the opposite direction from them, showing with all its appearance that it no longer needs them. And this question worried the guy most of all, until at one moment he heard cries for help. Apparently it was now clear that the golem abandoned them in order to attack the already wounded student. Lekan didn't understand at all what he should do in this situation, because he actually understood perfectly well that he wouldn't have enough time to help him so quickly. So he decided that the best solution in this case would be to immediately stop the golem. True, the guy didn't know how to do this, but at one point he remembered the words of Garcia, who during one lesson reminded him that he had too much mana, and he shouldn't use it like that. But this was not even the most important thing, but the fact that the element of fire has a huge potential for destruction, which now, in Lihan's opinion, would be very useful. Therefore, collecting mana in his hands, he created fire with which he was going to destroy this golem. As Garcia said, he had too much mana, so the fire was incredibly huge. The guy himself did not expect that the blow would be so strong. But in any case, now this is only beneficial, because he was finally able to destroy this monster, which in no way succumbed to ordinary magic. Lekan also did not forget that clay hardens when it encounters fire, but not in the case of the golem, because it was not tightly packed together, which is why it crumbled so quickly. The student from the Tiger Tower now understood why the entire first year was so afraid of Vardanaz, because his strength was incredibly enormous. Although Lekan was able to destroy the monster, he was not so happy, because it took a lot of energy from him. But now he finally began to understand what Garcia meant. Before he had time to say a word, the guys immediately ran up to him and began to carry him in their arms, because she had saved their lives again. But then these guys realized who they were praising. The White Tiger hated the Blue Dragon, and especially Vardanaz, whom they had just carried in their arms. So they immediately lowered him to the ground and immediately wanted to find out what he was doing here. They also started talking about how he always minds his own business, and the fact that he destroyed the golem doesn't mean anything. Such words made the same student whom Lekan saved speak up and ask the guys not to talk nonsense, because Lekan literally saved their lives, and they say that. These words were successfully ignored because one of them saw that Patrick was limping. Lekan, for some unknown reason, was surprised that the guy's name was Patrick, but in any case, he decided to ask him for help to clean up here. After some time, Lekan returned to his guys and said that there were several wounded from the Tiger Tower, to which Yenna told him that this was not critical, because the guys from the Phoenix Tower provide good, and most importantly, fast help. She especially liked the way Siana worked, who, according to Yenna, was excellent at preparing potions for blunt injuries and painkillers. Listening to all this, Lekan thought about what this girl would tell him if they faced each other again in some kind of competition in which she would lose. In any case, now he will have to talk to her, and he was not entirely delighted with this, because he had dealt with one problem and now he had a second one. Just at that moment, Siana approached him, and the first thing she said was that she heard that he defeated a clay golem, so she would like to offer him healing potions. The guy understood perfectly well why she was doing this and was hardly a sincere awakened one, because she most of all wants to prove that she is better than everyone else. But at some point these thoughts were interrupted by the opinion that this could actually be used as an opportunity. After which he immediately snatched the bottle from her hands and without thinking for a long time tried to drink it to the bottom. And he did it quite easily. After which there was the most important moment for which he did it. He told Siana that this was the best potion he had ever tried in his life. But Lekan didn't stop there and decided to back it all up with the fact that he simply couldn't believe that she had prepared it herself, although he was mentally thinking that he had learned to suck up just perfectly in his past life, so now it wasn't special problem for him. As expected for a guy, Siana believed it, so she immediately broke into a smile, after which she added that he was actually too kind to her, and she actually had room to grow. And she also decided to invite him to take all the bottles for himself. Lekan was expecting exactly this kind of reaction, so it seemed to him that this should be enough for this girl to no longer pester him with this rather useless competition of which of the two is better. As soon as Siana left Lekan, she immediately began to tell her friends that he was so polite and had a keen eye. It was clear that he was from a famous family, and not just from a village. Lekan was actually very tired of all this, but he was very pleased with the fact that this trick still worked. Moreover, it already seemed to him that he was able to earn the sympathy of not only Siana, but also all of the Phoenix Towers. But this was not understood at all by Yenna, who decided to ask Lee Khan why he was behaving this way. Did he really owe her something if he behaved this way? To which he immediately told her that this was complete nonsense. And instead of this dialogue, he offered her set out on the road. After some time on the way, the guys met two professors on their way, who were apparently going to meet them. Suddenly, Ingerdell jumped up and started running towards the students, because he really wanted to find out from them if everything was fine with them. But Erglum apparently wasn't quite. But apparently the students were not too happy to see them, and this was immediately clear from their reaction. Moreover, some of them immediately began to say that when they become great magicians, the first thing they will do is trample them first. Ingerdell until the end pretended that he did not understand why they had such evil intentions. Professor Erglma, on the contrary, was very happy about this, because he believed that their views showed that they had definitely learned something. He believed that this was exactly how their school worked, but at that moment it seemed that every word he said was clearly unnecessary. But apparently he didn't care because he continued to talk about how from now on they must always remain on guard because danger could sneak up on them at any moment. Although the students listened to him attentively, they still continued to think that it might be good to take revenge on him right now. Suddenly, Ingerdell began to say that from the very beginning he intended to stay with them, but the director literally forced him to abandon this idea. But it was quite obvious to see how the guys simply didn't believe him, and said that they were all the same. The professor still tried to prove to them that he was right, but all he heard in response was that they simply would no longer trust either him or Ergalm. This upset the man very much. He was literally ready to cry because he had lost touch with his students, who were connected to him spiritually through fencing. While Lee Khan was watching everything that was happening, he caught himself thinking that he really liked watching such things, because the kids finally stopped trusting their teachers, which makes them a little more mature. Although, judging by the reaction of Professor Ingerdell, he is speaking the absolute truth, but even in this case, no one wants to hear him. On the other hand, he also understood the students, because for them, the story that the man was kidnapped by the director seems too fantastic, because from the very beginning they simply did not see any sense in it. But how wrong they were in Lahan's opinion, because he knew very well that this skull was really capable of this, and most likely that's exactly what happened. And besides, for one moment he noticed that Professor Erglma was worried about Professor Ingerdell. Therefore, all these thoughts led Lee Khan to Professor Ingerdell and literally forced him to say that he believed the professor. These words finished off the man and he still began to cry, which was so unusual for some reason. After which he decided to hug the guy, and Professor Erglma, who was carefully watching all this, thought that Lee Khan was still a smart bastard and knew how to find an approach. In any case, now he was more interested in how they were able to deal with the problem, or rather with the test. Asen immediately assured him that, in fact, everything went more than successfully. After which he said that Lee Khan used an emerald water bomb to destroy a clay golem, and completely burned the second one with just one blow. This is not what the professor really wanted to hear, so he asked them to immediately stop with all this. And for starters, he wanted to know what a clay golem meant, because he sent a bull to them, so he was wondering where it went. Moreover, he assured them that besides this bull, he had not prepared anything else for them, and from their facial expressions, he immediately understood that they had not even seen him. But all these words again made them think that he was trying to justify himself to them. But this only buried him even more, so they asked him to stop as soon as possible. Now Professor Erglma, just like Ingerdell, tried to prove to them that he was talking to them seriously, but they did not believe him that it was a simple accident and the golem was not there on purpose. Listening to all this, Erglma saw in front of him a wall of mistrust that had appeared so unexpectedly for him. But now he most of all wanted to find out from Lee Khan whether what the guys were telling him was true. Was there really a clay golem instead of a bull? Lee Khan didn't understand why he was making such a surprised face and simply answered him that it was so. At that moment, Ingerdell approached them, who immediately wanted to ask Erglum how to understand this. Where is the bull then? The professor immediately began to make excuses and say that it was just some kind of misunderstanding, because in fact he had really prepared both the bull and the golems. But the bull seemed to have simply run away somewhere. But no one believed him, so Ingord decided to personally ask Lee Khan about what he had prepared for the golems, which Erglum really didn't like. Lee Khan apparently did not intend to answer these questions. So while the professors were figuring out who was right and who was wrong, Lee Khan simply disappeared. And this did not stop Ingerdell from continuing the interrogation of Erglum, who hoped that the man would leave him alone. In the evening of the same day, the guys gathered in the library to somehow do their homework, and each of them was very angry, because they, as aristocrats, simply did not understand why they needed to know so much useless information. They didn't even want to find out how much it cost to create a magic seal, because in their opinion they could buy it all with their parents' money. At the same moment, each of them bought various kinds of products at a fairly high price, and none of them even thought that it might be too expensive. But Lee Khan, who created his first automatic store, only made money from this. Moreover, Lee Khan was too lazy to do it, but it worked much better than he expected. Suddenly, one guy started laughing from each of them, who told them that it was funny for him to watch them whine about how this homework was too difficult for them, because it seemed to him that alchemy assignments were much more difficult, and this already liked dessert. But the most interesting thing is that this guy decided to make fun of them that they saw a huge golem in the forest. He just thought it was nonsense. Laihan, who was going to collect profits from his store, thought that they would not have to go through such things. But how very wrong they were. When suddenly Ina interrupted his thoughts and asked him to stop looking around and finally focus on important things. So the guy had to ask her for forgiveness and do as she said. And they were doing the very task of alchemy for which they went to the mountains. And for this they even brought cauldrons to their main room, in which they began to brew the potion. But unfortunately, most of the guys did too poorly, because the smell and the potion itself was, to put it mildly, bad. Lee Khan also cooked with them, and it was quite strange for him to watch how many failed with this elementary potion. Without a doubt, Lee Khan was confident that alchemy was very precise, so the slightest inconsistency would lead to an error. However, the fact was that absolutely all the students failed, and this prompted Lee Khan to think that the recipe might simply be incorrect from the very beginning, and that the problem had nothing to do with the students. Yena noticed that something was wrong with Lee Khan, so she decided to ask him what happened, after which the guy began to say that it seemed to him that Professor Ergelma had simply given them the wrong recipe from the very beginning, suggesting that they would have to figure it out themselves. Some guys laughed and immediately said that it was simply impossible, but still deep down they thought about it. But those who had already failed to cook it several times began to say that everything was so, although that they rather said so out of anger, because they can't do it. Lee Khan himself understood that now was definitely not the time for anger, because first they needed to finish the task, despite the desire to beat the professor. To begin with, he asked Yena for advice, to which the girl told him that it seemed to her that one of the ingredients was incorrect, and Lee Khan suspected that this could be a trap. But the main problem they have, as it seemed to Yena, is that they have too few ingredients to try everything, although she still believed that she could look for a solution in textbooks, but it would most likely take some time. Lee Khan understood that this option was not suitable for him, because he did not have time for this. He needed to use his pass to get out of school tomorrow. This made the guy climb out onto the table and start shouting at the guys to immediately stop what they were doing and come to him. And when they did this, he immediately began to say that the professor had deceived them again, and apparently this was just another lesson from him. But now it seemed to the guy that they needed to solve this problem together. So it seemed to him that combining the ingredients and figuring out the right recipe would be quite smart. Lee Khan also told them that he was going to other towers so that they could all act together as much as possible. Asan supported Lee Khan's idea, saying that they actually had different amounts of ingredients left, and it would be great to share with each other. And Ina liked the idea most of all. With help from other students, then they can really create something new, and thus share knowledge. Lee Khan didn't wait a minute more. He immediately went to other towers, because in fact, he needed to deal with this as quickly as possible. And all this was just a pleasure for his precious weekend, which he would spend in complete freedom and alone. Thus, things went much faster. The guys began to communicate and pass pieces of the recipe to each other. After some calculations and mental work, they were able to combine the correct ingredients to make a truly correct potion. And after some time, they finally managed to find the correct recipe for this potion. And Lee Han was most glad that they were able to finish it all early, so he would have more time to plan his weekend. Some students couldn't even believe that Professor Erglum's next trick would unite them so much. But they also did not forget that they had found the right recipe thanks to Lee Han, who brought them all together. At that moment, a student from the Blue Tower passed by and decided to intervene in this dialogue with the words that Lee Khan was in a hurry because he had plans for tomorrow. And if you believe this guy's words, Lee Khan will get out of here tomorrow with the help of his pass. The reaction of the other students was actually obvious, because you could immediately read complete shock and surprise on their faces. Some were not surprised that it was he who received this pass. Some immediately ran up to him to ask how he managed to get this pass. Lee Khan didn't want other students to know about this, because he perfectly understood that turmoil would begin around him. And that's how it happened. After they learned this news, most of them immediately began to say that it would be nice if he brought food and more food from there. But the most unexpected request was Asana, who asked Lee Khan to bring him books, and the guys did not understand why he needed books at the academy. They shouldn't be eaten. He assured them that of course he would like food, but he believed that in this case, they needed books more. And all because he visited the library with the thought that usually libraries are full of books that are systematically arranged and they are great for reading. But this only happened in normal libraries, and in their library there was real chaos. in which books were in different places and they were simply impossible to read. Therefore, he believed that they would most likely lose consciousness while they were looking for the necessary literature, even before starting their homework. So it seemed to him that he needed to stock up on the necessary books in advance. Gainando sincerely did not understand why everyone around him suddenly began to think about it so much. They wanted some magazines and novels. It seemed to him that they only needed to take cards and chessboards. Only then, perhaps, they could overcome boredom. His words caused anger and irritation, because none of the guys considered his hobbies important and useful. It was just entertainment. In any case, their conversations are too useless, because Li Han had already left long ago while they were arguing. That evening, Li Kun lay in his room and thought that tomorrow was a very important day for him, when he would finally be able to leave here. He believed that he would need to do more things, so he should get some rest and stay in shape. However, the whole problem was that he was too nervous that he simply could not sleep. And all because he was sure that traps would await him on his outing from the academy. Something like a limit on the items he could bring, or a limit on their weight or size. From time to time he was tormented by the thought that he would have to move quite far from the academy, for example, a village to which he would have to go for more than one day. It seemed to him that anything was possible when the director intervened, so he wanted to learn a spell that would help him move much faster. As soon as he thought about this, some book from his shelf simply fell onto the floor. It was a book that the director gave to Li Han, so he suddenly became interested in knowing why it suddenly fell. But before he could think about it, it suddenly opened, and seemed to know which page it needed to open on. The guy understood perfectly well what this meant, so he immediately began asking not to do it again. But it was already too late, because his body had already moved to another location. Li Kun touched this ground with his hand and almost immediately realized that this was an illusion created by the book, just like last time. But what was most interesting for the guy was that this illusion was called the deceptive step of Gonadalts. He had seen this spell before, but only in theory. Apparently today he would have to master it. And this was actually good news for Li Kun, because he realized that apparently the director recommended this book to him, because he understood what the guy was thinking about. And this time it was a good book. At least it seemed so to him from the very beginning. The only negative that the guy saw in this situation was that he didn't have time now, because tomorrow it was time to leave, so he had to ask to be sent back. But apparently this book completely copied the director's character and no one would just let him go from here. So he took back his words that this was a pretty good book. In any case, he began to understand very well that he really had no choice. So he decided that it would be quicker to learn this spell as soon as possible, and then get out of here. After some time, Li Kun was already standing next to the director in order to go beyond the boundaries of the academy, and still could not believe that he was able to learn the spell in just one night. Apparently in this world, all methods work. His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the director, who wanted first of all to congratulate Li Kun on his first foray outside the academy. The Lich also did not forget to add that this was, first of all, a reward for his achievements, for which Li Kun was very grateful to him. It was time to tell the guy about the rules, so the director reminded him that he must return to the main gate tomorrow before the sun reaches its peak. But if Li Kun couldn't do this, the director warned the guy that a pursuit squad would immediately go after him, which Li Kun expected from the director, but it still seemed to him that the director would not go that far. The director continued to tell him that he was only allowed to bring with him what he could carry. He could not take things like a carriage, a horse, or anything that he could ride on, and this was actually quite expected for Li Han. The director finished with this and asked the guy to make every effort to rest as much as possible. But this was already strange for Li Kun, because it seemed to him that the rules would be much stricter. At least he expected that there would be restrictions on the bringing in of items. Although this was not entirely important now, what was much more interesting was that he was finally able to choose from the academy. Li Kun went to the nearest village, which is located not far from the academy, in which he wanted to find out where all the nobles were, and as a local resident told him, they moved their estates at the request of the academy, and the nearest estate is a few days' ride away on horseback. Now Li Kun began to understand perfectly why the rules are so simple, because as it turned out, the director blocked all ways to get money from the very beginning. The powerful nobles of the empire do not need to lend money, because they have plenty of merchants who are willing to give up their wealth in order to build good relations with them. Anyone who grew up in such an environment is not even familiar with the concept of borrowing. That's why this nobleman was so surprised when Li Kun Vardanaz asked to borrow money from him, because he knew that the guy's family was incredibly rich, and he was just the head of a branch of the Klako merchants. Phelan was a village that was actually quite small in size, but it was still incredibly rich. And all this is thanks only to the magic school, because not only is there a huge amount of natural mana in itself, but the school also needs various ingredients for experiments. She offers attractive rewards to hired adventurers to find the ingredients that joyful magicians use to create whatever they want, and then the cycle simply repeats. The financial officer would go crazy if he saw the bills, except for a few. Everyone is in the circle of happiness that has formed here. But this does not mean that luck is on Lee Khan's side, because he can get everything he wants if he gets money, which is why he wanted to borrow money from the nobleman, who at that time himself understood perfectly well that he would actually benefit if he agreed to this proposal. He simply did not expect that he would have the opportunity to build relationships with the great Vardana's family, but he's still worried that he might ask for a huge amount that his merchant simply cannot allocate right now, so his tongue barely turned to ask the guy how much he needs. Lee Khan did not immediately answer this question, because in fact, he himself did not understand exactly how much money he needed. But the nobleman had already become worried about this, because he immediately began to think that this meant that it was so large that it was difficult to even name it. Although, on the other hand, his eyes lit up with this deal, and he firmly decided that even if he had to empty his personal savings, he would in any case take advantage of this chance. Suddenly, Lee Khan interrupted him and said that he only needed 20 silver coins. This was even more unexpected than the guy asking for a huge amount, so the nobleman had to ask again how much he needed. In response to this, Lee Khan said that if they couldn't give him 20, then 15 would also do. And then the nobleman realized that apparently the guy just needed money for groceries. Lee Khan didn't understand why the man opposite him was silent, so he started talking about how he could give him 12. If that's so much for them, the nobleman at one point interrupted him and asked him to stop reducing the amount, because they could give him 20. After which he also added that if the guy wants to buy a couple of things, he would be happy to show Lee Khan the village where all this could be done. In response to this, the guy said that he would be very grateful to him. Lee Khan got up from the table and began to leave, and the nobleman noticed that Lee Khan simply ate all the treats that were on the table, which also seemed strange to him. In any case, Aryan thought of a plan for interacting with the young nobleman. Even if he is a student at the School of Magic, but still a first year, and now that he has a chance to shop, he will probably spend a lot of money on all kinds of goods. And when he wants to buy something, Aryan will take the initiative with a cool look. The man with horns thought that this was just a great plan to impress the nobleman. However, Lee Khan chose a slightly different strategy, and asked the seller to give them something that would be easy to store, such as canned food and something small. In his opinion, he also simply did not need clothes. He preferred to look for durable and thick fabric. In the next shop, he actually asked the seller to fold him cheap paper that would be difficult to tear. And he also wanted to know if they had books on illusion magic that could deceive the eyes of professors. After all these purchases, Aryan knew perfectly well that his plan had completely failed, and at this rate, he would only become an amazing porter. But in any case, he admired Lee Khan, because despite the fact that he comes from a family of aristocrats, he has extraordinary bargaining abilities. At this point, his thoughts were interrupted by Lee Khan, who said that it seemed he had already bought everything he needed, and now he would like to know where the stable is. This question put Aryan in difficulty, because as far as he knows, you simply can't drive near the school. But Lee Khan asked him not to worry about it. After all, according to him, that's not what the guy needs the stable for. The nobleman, without any problems, led Lee Khan to Amur's stable, which was next to the village. Lee Khan was pleased because he understood perfectly well that this was in fact the largest stable in the village, which suited him completely. The first thing the guy did when he entered the stable was to say hello to the owner, who immediately realized that the guy was from a magic school and therefore was glad to see him. Lee Khan immediately noticed that there were a couple of horses here, which was to be expected from the largest stable. Therefore, the guy finally decided to ask if they have clients here who go to the Magic Academy from here. The owner's face immediately changed when he heard this question, because he didn't understand at all how the guy knew this. After which he still said that they had merchants and adventurers who had entered into a contract with the school, and His Majesty's envoy was also using this place. But now the owner of the stable was wondering why the guy was even asking him about this. Instead of answering this question, Lee Khan decided to directly say that he would pay him if he adjusted the schedule to a certain date to help him escape. As it turned out, the only reason Lee Khan came here was to prepare for the next method of escape. In response to this, the owner of the stable told him that he looked like a first-year student, but he was making quite serious plans. Even in the tribes living in the most difficult places of the empire, there were few such brave men as the guy. Such was the man's opinion. And that's the only reason he wanted to help Lee Khan. The guy was glad that he agreed to his proposal, but the man immediately asked him not to rejoice ahead of time, because he believed that doing such things would be incredibly difficult. The fact was that the man somehow helped several guests get into the school, and saw how strictly they were checking there. And the only thing he realized there was that for him, it seems the process itself is even stricter, since he is a stranger. Lee Khan understood him perfectly, and in fact he guessed that it would be difficult. However, suddenly the man told the guy that in fact there is still one way. After which he added that the situation would actually change dramatically if he had a flying beast on which he could fly over the school. Lee Khan still didn't quite understand where he would get the flying beast, but still he asked the man to tell him more about it. The owner of the stable immediately said that he actually found out about this method by accident. According to him, the school takes a serious approach to checking the identity of strangers leaving the school, but these measures are not applied to its own. It seemed to him that perhaps the matter would be that his identities had already been confirmed, and these were his conjectures. Lee Khan immediately had a picture in his head of how he tried to escape last time, and the criminals only realized after some time that there was a professor inside this carriage. Of course, the man immediately warned the guy that he would be caught if he tried to leave alone. But if they are together, then the guy can dress up as a professor, or be an errand boy who leaves school with him. Leon actually liked this idea, but there was still one problem with this plan. And this problem was that he did not fully know whether he could find a flying beast that did not have an owner in order to steal this beast. While Lee Khan was thinking about this, the man decided to tell him that if he had a crazy idea to steal an animal, then he shouldn't do it. The guy immediately assured the man that he had not even thought about it. The man was happy about this, so he decided to give him some corn tea to help him relax a little. In any case, the guy thought that there were a lot of facts that he would have to settle, but he simply had no other choice, and he was ready to go through all of this. Therefore, he agreed to this adventure without any problems, and told the man that he was counting on him. Then the man told him that he would be at school in 2 weeks, at midnight on Saturday. Until this time, he asked Lee Khan to bring his beast to the roof of the stable, and as soon as Lee Khan is ready, then they can finally fly away from the academy. As soon as the guy heard this plan, he immediately took off and ran to do everything to carry it out. No matter how Aryan asked him to stop, he still couldn't do anything, although he understood that he would like to bring as many items as possible. But he needed to warn Lee Khan that there were no shops in that direction that he could will come in handy. Lee Khan finally answered him and said that he just needed to visit one place, but he wanted to do it immediately. And therefore, if it was hard for them to carry all this, he invited his assistants to wait for him at the entrance to the city, after which he literally disappeared. A few minutes later, Lee Khan reached the very place where Valdoran's workshop was. In the center of this store, there was a girl who told him that it was so, and immediately invited Lee Khan to sit down. And as soon as he did this, she wanted to ask him what brought him here. Just before he gives her an answer, she would like to tell him that it is very important at this moment to be extremely frank and not even think about lying. And mentally she decided that things were very bad for her, because she sincerely did not understand what a student from the School of Magic had forgotten here, since she only has the 3rd circle, which corresponds to a 2nd or 3rd year student. She could not understand why he needed her if the school had more outstanding magicians. At that moment, Lee Khan finally found the words to tell her that, in fact, the tower he wants to get into has magic that prohibits intruders from entering. And since the magic of illusion is related to security, he thought that maybe she could help him. This actually scared her even more, because if she understands correctly, then he is talking about the tower at the school. And he also looked like a 1st-year student to her. But then she didn't understand how he managed to sneak out of school, and did he really want to find a way to bypass the alarms? But what could she say for sure? That he would become an extraordinary magician who would be known by everyone in the area. She told him that there were so many types of magic that prohibited intruders from entering that it was impossible to count. She was almost sure that even the most experienced experts probably didn't know this. But extraordinary mages are like experienced tomb robbers and can determine the structure of detection magic. And even more experienced mages can reverse engineer and disable the system. Although she immediately warned him that this requires a lot of experience and knowledge, and even if she teaches him the method, it will be difficult to use it correctly. Lee Khan was absolutely ready to hear such an answer, and therefore understood perfectly well that it was unlikely to be easy. And so he wanted to quickly find out if there was a shorter way, something like completely destroying detection magic. These words, quite unexpectedly for Lee Khan, made the girl laugh. She thought that he was just joking, but when she looked at him again, she realized that he was absolutely serious. So she had to explain to him that this was actually impossible, and the whole point was that it is difficult to remove the magic of protection, even if you know its structure, and he completely wants to destroy it. And for this to become possible, he would need a huge force that could strike and turn off an entire single structure that supports magic from the inside, and therefore it seemed to her that it was simply impossible to pull off something like that in their world. But apparently Lee Khan didn't care at all about these words, and so he got up from his chair and once again asked the girl to tell him how to do it. She didn't think for a long time and told him that she simply couldn't do it, because she understood that if something went wrong, he risked being in danger. Lee Khan assured her that he would not act thoughtlessly, which is why he asks her to teach him, for which he is even willing to pay the cost of the consultation. And as soon as he offered her money, she agreed to this adventure, not with too much desire. At the same moment, she began to say that firstly, he would need a colossal amount of mana, and for this, she believed that it would be good to use a magic circle or mana stones. And for this, She would like to find out from him whether he knows how to draw magic circles. And as it turns out, Lee-kun just learned how to do this at the academy. This couldn't help but make her happy. So she told him that next time he would need to stand in the place where Manhwa was distributed in the circle and collect his mana there. She understood that it was very difficult to control such an amount of mana. But she immediately assured him that this was not even the main problem, but that then it would have to be directed in the desired direction. And according to her, it is not enough just to send your mana. Like the flow of a river, the pressure must be powerful, as if it were a wave that broke the dam. All these words were too incomprehensible for him, but he still continued to listen to her as carefully as possible. And only after her question, Lee-kun told her that in fact it seemed to him that everything would be much simpler than she said. This was quite expected for her. Even after her warning, he did not change his mind. But on the other hand, she understood that if he was accepted into the academy, then he was outstanding in his family. However, the world doesn't care that you are so talented. Arrogance is dangerous for a young and talented person, or so it seemed to the girl. In any case, the guy did not give up his idea and she began to perform the spell. As soon as she began to say the spell, it immediately began to work and Lee-hun's spirit seemed to leave his body. The guy just didn't understand what was happening and why suddenly the distance between the two of them suddenly became so huge. Although he understood that they were in the same places, it still seemed to him that she was far from him. Could this really be magic? In addition, he felt something strange in front of him. It seemed to him that if he slipped and fell here, he would be in big trouble. The girl at that moment was thinking that even if she had prepared this magic against an ambush, it would probably serve as a good warning. So she asked Lee-kun not to move, and she also warned him that she could show that nothing had changed. In response to this, he immediately wanted to know whether he would end up in the maze if he lost his balance. This question made the girl think that the guy had a pretty good instinct for a first year, but she still believed that there must be a reason why he was so confident in this. Therefore, she once again decided to check with him whether he still wants to continue, because even though this is low-level magic, it is still very dangerous and quite frightening. Lee-kun at that moment thought that she was teaching him in a kind manner and was not even in a hurry, and in this aspect he liked her more than many professors at the academy. But now he most of all wanted to finally experience what he had just been taught. So without thinking for a long time, he stood up from his seat and was ready to start practicing. While he was trying to use this magic, he tried to concentrate on the fact that it should be like a stream of water that provokes a dam to break. The girl was shocked by how easily Lee-hun managed the spell, so she could only watch him. After such magic, the girl could only sit in shock, which is basically what she did. She looked at Lee-kun, and in her head the thoughts that this was simply impossible were nothing. Now she understood that in fact geniuses apparently really do exist. Garcia, meanwhile, near the main gate, told the director that she could handle it just fine on her own. After all, she was the one in charge today. But he immediately told her that he couldn't just leave. After all, he believed that something really interesting was planned today, and he under no circumstances wanted to miss it. Garcia understood that the director was simply waiting for Lee-hun to be late. Therefore, she decided to tell him that he should abandon all his hopes for this, because she believed that Lee-hun was different from ordinary students, and not to say that he argued with her. However, the director believed that this had nothing to do with his talent, rather due to a lack of money and time. He was literally limited in what he could bring back, and it seemed to the director that the smarter Lee-kun considered himself, the more things would pull him to bottom. And time was gradually coming to an end, and the director really wanted to send a detachment after him. Garcia even had to ask the Lich to keep his thoughts to himself. Suddenly, she was distracted because she saw something incredibly huge in the distance that looked like a troll worker or some kind of giant. But to her surprise, it was Lee-kun who was dragging a huge load behind him. Moreover, various kinds of boxes were flying behind him, which he also planned to take with him to school. This picture shocked the professor and the director, and it was not surprising, really. Garcia couldn't believe that he was using basic control magic to hold the boxes in the air, while he was carrying a mountain of things on his back, and it must have seemed very difficult to her. The director was even a little upset. He was sad to realize that Lee-kun had learned too much during this time. Garcia understood everything, but she would still like to know who taught him the magic of physical strength, because as far as was known, it had serious side effects, which is why it is not taught to first years. In any case, she believed that she should warn him before he did, but before she could even finish speaking, the director stopped her, who believed that it is difficult to become a good magician in too strict conditions. But all that appeared in Garcia's head at that moment was that this skull was simply a criminal. It seemed to Lee-kun that magic should be named after something corresponding to the effect, but the fact that names and effects are not honored confuses the guy. Therefore, he had already failed several times, and it seemed to him that if this continued, he would simply be wasting his time. He decided that in this case, they needed to approach the issue from a different angle. Lee Kun himself didn't know that his flexibility and open mind were a strength that was rarer than such a reserve of mana. The guy, even in his sleep, could not understand why the director created this magic in the first place, and what he was thinking about. So he tried to do rather non-standard things. It seemed to him that the Lich did this in his youth. Even then, madness was raging in his eyes. Probably his character was simply terrible then, and his face was not friendly and bitter. It was with these thoughts that Lee Kun tried to mold a statue out of sand that would look like the director in his youth. But the most interesting thing for Lee Kun was whether this earthly man would be able to stand up at all. The realization that this was a dream. It seemed to him that everything should work out. The guy blew lightly on this sculpture, and although he wanted it, he still didn't expect it to actually come to life. His works of art looked quite beautiful, even somehow I couldn't believe it. But the most important thing is that this guy will not act without his command. But now Lee Kun got an understanding of this magic when he felt himself in the role of the creator. 3219. After such an experience, Lee Kun felt his physical condition literally rise to the next level, which couldn't help but make him happy. Even this book congratulated the guy on this, for which he was grateful to it. And with this, apparently his studies were over, because the book asked him to go back. At least that's what it seemed to Lee Kun himself. Before leaving, the guy would like to know if this magic has any side effects, but apparently Lee Kun will not receive an answer to this question, because as soon as he asked it, the book simply closed and that was the end of their conversation. After which he woke up in his room and was essentially ready to go to the nearest village. Now that Lee Kun had finally returned to the academy, he thought that he had no choice but to use magic, despite being worried about it, because he had a lot of different baggage that he had carried quite a long distance. The director perfectly noticed that the guy was using his magic and circulating mana throughout his body, although then he noticed that Lee Kun was still just releasing it, which meant that he was still using basic control. This would be a big problem for an ordinary person who would obviously pass out from mana depletion. But since Lee Kun has a huge reserve of mana, he can do such things. Finally, Lee Kun came closer to the professor and said that he had returned at the indicated time and was not late. The director greeted the guy and said that he was glad to see him again, although Lee Kun still thought that the Lich looked rather disappointed. Garcia intervened in their conversation and asked Lee Kun to go drink a potion, relieve fatigue, and rest a little. The guy at that moment thought that he had prepared for this, but he still gets very scared when she says that, so he had to agree with her. When the guy had already left, the director suddenly wanted to know where Lee Kun got the money from. That same day, after Lee Kun had gotten some sleep, he went down to the rest of the guys, who immediately ran up to him to ask him if he was hurt, and how did it all go. Lee Kun didn't really want to talk to them, so he simply said that everything went well and everything was fine with him too. They don't have to worry about him. At that moment, he was haunted by the thought that the pain would not leave him for several days, but everything went away after he got some sleep. He even felt somehow uneasy because he felt good. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by Yenna, who approached Lee Kun and offered to drink cocoa, immediately warning him that it was free for him. She sat down next to him and told him that she had been spying on his horse while he was away, for which he was very grateful to her, although Lee Kun still decided to ask if everything was okay, because his horse is quite angry towards people. But according to Yenna, she was peaceful and stood still while she looked after her. This was even more unexpected for him, and now he understood that this horse behaved this way only with him. Then they started talking about the fact that next week has come, and Yenna wanted to ask Lee Kun what homework they still needed to do. The guy answered her that after Professor Urgulum's task, all they had left was to steal the flag from the White Tiger Tower. The Skull Director's homework on the subject of basic magical personality development was quite strange, because Lee Kun didn't understand how it would help improve their personalities. But they definitely needed to steal the tower's flag. And first, Lee Kun would like to ask them if anyone has tried this, but according to the guys, they didn't succeed. They even tried to win them over with sweets, but even in that case, nothing worked out for them. They weren't able to penetrate or bribe, and they didn't have any other ideas yet. Of course, this was sad news for Lee Kun, but he was pleased with the fact that, fortunately, at least they were not inactive. While Gainando was listening to all this, he decided to clarify why they couldn't just cooperate with them and exchange flags. The guys didn't understand why he was even saying something like that, because did he really forget how the White Tiger offended Vardanaz? Lee Kun asked them to calm down, after which he added that the only way was to set up an ambush, and he already had something in mind. Gainando, even after this, believed that exchanging flags was still better. He thought that the guys from the Tiger Tower looked trustworthy. It was surprising for Lee Kun to watch Gainando express his opinion, so he wanted to clarify in more detail why the guy was so confident in his proposal. According to Gainando, they chatted quite nicely with him and gave him bread and milk. Lee Kun immediately realized that if they gave him food in such a place, then it was clearly a trap. But the guy didn't fully understand why they were doing this. Was it really how they tried to bribe him? Well, if so, then they chose the right goal. Although at some point Lee Khan thought about it, and it seemed to him that his idea could work. So he came closer to Gainando and said in his ear what he was thinking. In response to this, the guy was incredibly happy and did not forget to say that he knew that Lee Khan would understand him. After which he said that he would be back soon and ran away. Tiger Tower meanwhile painted another flag that was very similar to their original one. Giselle, looking at him, thought that this flag looked pretty good and was almost no different from the real one, so it seemed to him that it was not in vain that they gave the guys from the Turtle Tower rabbit meat. When suddenly he was distracted by the same guy who gave Gainando bread and milk, and he ran to say that the blonde fell for their trap. Moreover, they agreed to meet him tomorrow at midnight opposite the school. Morad was not entirely sure of this, although it seemed like the news was good. And the thing was that it seemed to him that the blonde couldn't just be trusted. He agreed to such things too harshly. But the strangest thing is that they agreed to the deal after a conversation with Lee Khan. He couldn't believe that Vardanaz just agreed. The guy still continued to prove him wrong, and tried to convince him that Anrago had done it this time, and that he just needed to deceive the blonde. Despite how they tried to persuade him, he still thought that they were too stupid to talk to them about such things. Although, on the other hand, he understood that for now it was even to his advantage. As they say, sometimes it is useful to feed hamsters with carrots so that they obey better. So she told them that they were great and did a really good job. He agreed so quickly only because he understood that even if they made a mistake, they would most likely only lose the false flag, and there was nothing to worry about. Closer to night, Lee Khan and his friends approached the White Tiger Tower for a small task. Ratford told Lee Khan that it was a great honor for him to be here with him, and Lee Khan himself was very glad that Ratford was with them, because they really needed the look of a professional thief. Yenna suddenly sighed and said that they needed to call Nelia, because she might be offended again. In her head, Lee Khan had already imagined this picture of Nelia telling them that they went together on this mission, and at the same time, they did not invite her with them. It seemed to the guy that her reaction would be obvious, and the girl would simply run away in tears because they didn't want to communicate with her. Lee Han knew that they would most likely have problems with this, so he decided that they would need to explain everything to her later. In the meantime, he decided that they needed to concentrate on this task. So he reminded the guys that Gainando had lulled their vigilance when he agreed to this exchange, and then they would proceed according to plan. In general, this was not much of a plan, but still, the first point would be for Lacan and Ratford to penetrate the White Tiger Tower. The second point is that the rest of the guys will follow them at Lecon's signal. The guy perfectly understood the fact that they were nobles and most likely had never staged such ambushes before. So he asked Ratford to give them a little advice on how to behave. After which he and Lecon were completely ready to hit the road. Before entering, Lecon decided that it would be a good idea for him to first read what magic was used here. And as soon as the guy put his hand on it, he realized that there were a bunch of different seals that were used for this. This sight even pushed his body a little away from the main gate, which made Ratford nervous. But he still decided that they needed to continue, because in any case, the only thing they need to overcome is the magic that blocks the entrance. At that moment, Ratford felt a huge amount of mana condensing, although he did not even try to detect it. Although then he remembered who was standing in front of him and realized that in fact this was how it should be. The director felt a rather strange feeling in his office, and almost immediately he realized that the protective magic of the White Tiger Tower was not working. He immediately thought that the anti-magicians had returned, but his skeleton assistant immediately tried to calm him down, because in fact this was not the case. After which he added that the actions of the tower's protective magic were interrupted by the first years. The director realized that apparently the whole point was in his homework, which he gave them. And the one who can stop the effect of protective magic, even for a short while, is most likely Lecon, or so it seemed to the director. But he was more interested in another question now. The director knew that there were other protective spells at the entrance, so he wanted to know what happened to them. The assistant told him that the work of most of the defense spells was interrupted. The director simply couldn't believe that there were so many of them, but Lecon was still able to deal with them. It seemed to him that the guy hit them incredibly hard. As soon as Lecon was able to stop the protective magic, he immediately ordered the guys to go inside. But the main problem was that he noticed how the spell was slowly recovering. He had an understanding that this spell was quite strong, so he understood that if it did recover, then they would be in huge trouble. But apparently it was too late to think about it, because as soon as Lecon thought about it, at that moment Gainanda was grabbed by a huge white tiger, which literally took him far into the darkness, leaving the other guys untouched. Apparently Gainando stumbled upon a trap, so the tiger grabbed him and threw him out of the tower, or so it seemed to the guys. Therefore, Lihan had to tell his comrades that they needed to hurry, because all the traps were restored too quickly, and it would be much more difficult for them when this happened. Ratford ran into the White Tiger's lounge with great joy, and believed that they were finally able to cope. The guys were in this hall for the first time, so they were quite surprised by what they saw, because their hall is not like that at all. Li-han reminded them that they were not here to admire their recreation hall, so he asked them to immediately take the flag and run away from here. And he considered separation to be the best way to find the flag, so he asked them to scatter to different places and search. Fortunately, Li-han exhaled after realizing that there was no one in this room. Otherwise, they would have ended up in a stalemate, or so he thought until he heard a voice behind him. Was it Durju, who didn't even understand what they were doing here? He came because he heard a noise here, and now he was most interested in how they were able to get here in the first place. Li-han did not give him any answer to his questions. Instead, he shouted and asked the guy to stand still and turn around. And as soon as Durgu did this, a ball flew into his face. Such a blow quite obviously knocked out the guy, so he fell to the floor unconscious. Ina wasn't entirely sure that they were doing the right thing. Li-kan believed that it would be better for Durju, because he could have problems if others found out that he was involved in this. And when they see him unconscious, there will be no misunderstanding. Li-kan did not want Durju to become a loner like Nilya. Yena didn't even think about it, but now she completely agreed with Li-han and fully supported him. Suddenly their dialogue was interrupted by someone's voice, who shouted that he had finally found this flag. And Ratford, who found the flag, shouted. But the problem was that there were too many of these flags. Li-kan understood that these were all fakes, but that wasn't even the problem. It was that it was too dark in this room to identify the real one. Therefore, the decision came on its own, and Li-kan invited them to take all these flags with them, which they agreed with. And as soon as they agreed on what they would do next, the light suddenly turned on, and Li-kan's first thought was that this could be an ordinary trap. But it turned out that the protective spell had already worked, and the tiger began to little by little throw the students of the Blue Tower out of its territory. Ratford was not distracted at this time and took absolutely all the flags and was ready to leave this place. Li-kan, in turn, saw no reason to stay here, so he shouted to everyone else to run away immediately. From such screams and such movement, other guys from the Tiger Tower also woke up, who believed that the sounds were unlikely to come from their tower, because it was literally impossible. Her Majesty's Knight generally believed that nothing could happen in this tower, because strangers simply would not be able to enter here. But apparently he will have to take back his words, because immediately after this phrase he saw the guys from the Blue Dragon running in front of them. You could certainly tell from their faces that they were surprised. Li-han, looking at these frightened white tiger students, understood that they had been noticed, and now they needed to speed up even more. Her Majesty's Knight did not expect to see his princess there, who, just like the other guys, ran past him. At the last moment, Li-kan and his friends were able to run out of this tower. At least that's what it seemed to the guy, although he still ran the risk of falling into a trap, because the tiger was still chasing him. A little more and Li-kan would have stayed in this tower overnight, but this time he was lucky. Now he can finally exhale a little because things really aren't that bad for them. They were able to cope, at least for now, and now they can rest a little. But apparently they don't have much time to rest, because Li-kan heard the guys from the Tiger Tower start shouting that they needed to catch up with the Blue Dragon reptiles and take the flag back. Therefore, Li-kan had to immediately shout to the guys that they should all immediately get together, because the tigers were already on their way. First of all, he asked the guys to raise those who had fallen to the ground and could not move further on their own. Li-kan himself took charge of Gainando, who still had not come to his senses, and he tried with all his might to wake him up. But at that moment, Gainando had a dream in which he was riding in a karate, and asked the driver not to drive so fast because he was getting seasick. Li-kan was very angry about this, and he asked Gainando to finally come to his senses, because he is not a driver at all. At that very moment, the White Tiger guys ran out of the tower and tried to catch up with the thieves. Li-han didn't expect them to come out so quickly, but this is just another reason why they should speed up. But in any case, he understood perfectly well that at this pace they would still be caught up. So he began to talk about how they needed bait that would slow down their pursuers a little. Anrago fled first of all with the words that Li-kan was simply an inhuman, because Durgyu at least trusted him, and he betrayed him like that. Li-kan understood that this was an excellent opportunity to completely protect Durgyu. Therefore, he directly told them that Durgyu was actually just a pawn and a fool for him, who believed him. This made Anrago even more angry, so he continued to run towards Li-kan to stab him. But this was just what he was waiting for, so he immediately took out his magic wand and cast a tide spell. This magic was not dangerous and was unlikely to harm anyone, but it could easily stop the pursuer. Anrago simply could not raise his hands. The water was incredibly heavy, and all he could do was call Li-kan names. But he didn't have to suffer for long, because his friends came to his aid, who were surprised that he was such a fearless person. Although Li-kan did not intend to end there, he first turned to the White Tigers. Li-han strongly advised them not to follow them, because he could use this spell an infinite number of times, and in such darkness they would not be able to dodge. Although mentally he understood that they needed to leave right now, before the other guys came, because his threats could most likely work only now. But when help arrives, They are unlikely to give anything. After these words, Anrago began to shout that there was no point in worrying about him. He only asked to make Durju's enemy regret his actions. These words seemed to ignite a spark in them, and now Lee Khan realized that it was still necessary to knock out this guy so as not to say too much. A few seconds later, they had already surrounded him and were trying to drive Lee Khan into a blind corner. Lee Khan didn't have a solution to this problem, so he decided that first he needed to think it over. It seemed to him that the best solution would be if he launched a water ball to the left side and repelled blows from the right with his sword. But after all this, he was going to run away when he blocked their field of view. But his thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the cry of Gainando, whom he asked not to twitch, but he still continued to scream. The guys from Tiger Tower also thought that they were not stupid enough to believe such a stupid trick. But this laughter continued until one of the guys was simply grabbed by a huge tree wind. After some time, a hologram appeared in the sky, with which the director came out and began to say that the summoned monster had escaped from the greenhouse. After which he added that he didn't know anything, but he should be immediately put in the punishment room. But it felt like the Lich was not talking to the students. Lee Kun understood that things were not going well for him, but he also clearly understood that now was not the time for emotions. But he could not fight while Gainando was lying on him. The branches of this tree were already aimed at Lee Kun, and the guy tried his best to repel this attack, but it didn't work out too well until a few more blows from the side came to his aid. And it was Garcia who arrived on time to help her beloved student, so she immediately asked him to stand behind her. She couldn't believe that another monster had escaped. And she also perfectly understood that this week would be difficult for new students. But Lee Khan was confused by the word "one more." But then I caught myself thinking that now was not the time to think about it at all. And so I told the professor that this grape monster had taken his friend. Garcia heard him and realized that things were bad here, so she began preparing for a special spell. After some time, all the guys were already lying on the ground and in relative safety. And only after this did Lee Khan decide to ask Garcia what had happened. The woman began to tell him that although this school was almost perfectly protected from external invaders, then with what was happening inside, things were different, since there was little they could do about the incidents that occurred during the training of magic. This summoned monster is one of those cases, and it looks like the students failed one of their experiments. But this made her laugh, because as it turned out, such things happen here periodically, so she was no longer surprised by this. It seemed to Lee Kun that this was far from a reason to laugh, because the academy students were attacked, but he decided to just thank her for telling him all this. Then he added that he had heard that there were other escaped monsters, and he wanted to believe that the problem would be solved soon. She responded with a smile and assured him that they would all be caught within a month. It was too long for Lee Han, but what was most surprising to him was that Garcia simply told them that they should be careful. A few days later, on every corner, a hologram of the director said that since summoned monsters were freely moving around the academy, students should be especially careful. Some guys even began to suspect that they had released these monsters on purpose, because they simply did not understand why the director and professors could not immediately grab them. Lee Kun, listening to all this, thought that the professors were actually just too lazy to do anything. After all, it was obvious that there were many strong magicians in this academy, and the guy was sure that if they involved all the professors, they would most likely be able to defeat even a dragon. They are the kind of people who force their students to correct mistakes, and what they do when students make these mistakes is right. Force them to correct them. Therefore, it seemed to Lee Khan that it would be better if everyone forgot about this, so he suggested that the guys finish with these conversations, and it would be better to start breakfast, which he will now prepare. Lee Han was sure that they were probably tired after what happened last night, so he thought it would be a good idea to have something to eat. It was pretty obvious that the guys would react quite positively to this proposal. After a while, they were already eating the food that Lee Khan had prepared and listening to Gainando talk about how there are positive aspects in today. He said that he felt so good when he saw the panic of these tiger students, and Yenna completely agreed with him. It seemed to her that it was quite cool when they all worked together. But most of all, according to her, she likes to have lunch together, and therefore she hopes that their life will continue in the same way. When suddenly she stopped and decided to ask Lee Han if he thought the morning classes would go well. At first, the guy didn't quite understand what she was telling him. But then he remembered that he had a fencing class where there would probably be a huge number of white tiger students. But he still thought that the class would go well. Although when he finally came to class, the energy there was not entirely favorable. So now he was not entirely sure that the class would be successful. But before he could enter, Dugdu called him to him, who wanted to talk to Lee Khan. First of all, Durju began to tell Lee Khan that if he was trying to take care of him, then there was no need for it. Last night, when the guys tried to steal the flag of the White Tigers, Durju lay unconscious almost the entire time, and when he woke up, he was surrounded by several guys, to whom he asked what happened, to which he was told that blue dragons broke into them at night to steal their flag. They also did not forget to add that Vardanaz had been using Dugdya all this time, and he even admitted it himself. But the troll was not as stupid as they were, and understood perfectly well that in fact Likhan pretended to be a villain for his sake. And now Dugdu tells him that if he can't approach him because he's afraid of what others will think of him, then they can't be friends. But on the other hand, he didn't care about that at all. Likhan thought that in fact there was nothing noble in stealing the flags and knocking him out, but in such situations it was better to remain silent, which is what Likhan did. But their conversation did not remain private for long, because other guys from the White Tiger saw this and immediately began shouting that they were trying to deceive Dugdya again. The guys stood in front of him and assured the troll that he should not communicate with this guy. Likhan could, of course, have done something, but he decided to leave this situation alone. It seemed to him that it would be much better for Dugdu. In addition, Professor Ingerdel had already come to class and was very happy to see everyone. The first thing he said was that when he woke up he saw that there were monsters roaming around the academy, and it seemed to him that it was so ridiculous. But since students must continue their studies, the man thought about it for a long time and tried to find a way to benefit from it. Likhan, listening to him, understood that all this was leading to something bad, and he didn't quite like what Ingerdel was leading to. And at that moment, Ingerdel said that as a result of careful thought, he managed to catch the summoned monster, and now, according to him, they will fight with it for training. Likhan almost immediately thought that the professor was doing too wrong, because on the contrary, he needed to make sure that there were no monsters nearby. Although other students apparently shared his opinion, because they immediately began to say that the man was completely right. They believed that they could not defeat them if they simply retreated out of fear. They were confident that a truly strong knight would meet him face to face. Ingerdel honestly admitted to them that at times he was even going to change his mind if someone objected to him, but now he sees that, as expected, talented fencers think completely differently. The professor was also interested to know what Likhan thought about this, to which he confidently answered Ingerdel that this was just a brilliant idea. The guy himself didn't understand how he said something like that. It literally came out of his mouth. But you can't change anything. Since you already said it, then let it be so, especially since the professor was so happy. After they decided to do just that, Ingerdel told them that now they would be divided into teams of 3 people, and as a result of the draw, people with the same numbers would end up on the same team. According to the results of this draw, Likhan, Digdu, and Giselle ended up on the same team. Likhan simply didn't believe his eyes, and also didn't understand how he could be so lucky to pull out these 2 of all people. Morad, as soon as he learned this, immediately turned to Likhan with the words that he had a great time thanks to him. Likhan understood perfectly well what this guy was talking about. Then the guys from the White Tiger were severely punished when they were caught for trying to escape. In any case, Likhan suggested that he forget about everything that happened and not continue to behave childishly, at least while they were on the same team. It is quite obvious that this proposal caused laughter from Morad, who apparently will not be able to forget anything like this until he takes proper revenge. Even Dugdu couldn't believe that Likhan was saying this seriously, and apparently it was so. The guy said the most ridiculous thing. The troll even decided to explain to his friend that Morad is from the north, and people there will never calm down until they forget their grievances. Therefore, Dugdu was sure that Likhan needed to be more careful, and the troll himself was ready to help him if necessary. But now Likhan didn't really care about this, because apparently in his team, it would be difficult to complete the professor's task. Once the teams were all formed, the professor invited each of them to finally move on to the next step. Ingerdel announced that each team would need a leader, and he prepared something for his selection, after which he took out a small piece of paper and said that the leader would be a man with a red dot in the corner of his lot. According to him, the leader would issue orders, and the rest would have to follow them and fight the monster. Likhan immediately looked at his piece of paper and realized that, unfortunately, he would not be the leader of his beautiful trinity. There was another hope. If Dugdu had become the leader, it would have been much better. But apparently he lost this chance too. And the worst option for the 2 guys unfortunately came true, because Morad became the leader of their group. Likhan was as dissatisfied as possible with this. Although he tried not to show it, he could only advise Morad to clearly formulate his orders, unless of course he wanted to get stabbed in the back. Morad, in turn, tried not to sink lower, and also answered with a smile that he was already looking forward to working with subordinate number 1. Between these 2 fires, Dugdu felt not at his best. He even remembered that there was a saying that knights who witnessed an ice storm in the northern mountains would no longer be afraid of anything. And the troll was just such a knight who witnessed the storm at a fairly young age. But even this did not give him self-confidence, and looking at these 2, he was incredibly scared. This awkward moment was interrupted by one of the students, who suddenly became quite interested in finding out what kind of animal they were going to fight with. Ingerdel, after thinking a little, nevertheless told them that in fact he simply could not tell them about it. After all, in his opinion, In order to learn how to fight unknown summoned monsters in the future, you need to learn how to fight without special training. Lee Khan believed that all these words were just another nonsense that professors usually talk about, so he simply said that in this case they need something to destroy him. But it seems no one heard Vardhanaz because the students simply continued to shout that the professor was simply an incredible and cool person for them. They assured him that they would do everything to defeat any enemy he put in front of them and show him true knightly honor. Lee Khan believed that this was just an academy of magic, and not a knightly tournament, and no matter how Murad wanted it, he agreed with Lee Khan. Although Murad still did not intend to talk to his ward, and asked Leon not to look at him like that. Lee Khan told him that he actually didn't think that he would meet someone here who would think exactly like him. Murad asked him not to be stupid, because the only thing they need to do is follow his orders. Lihan himself was not going to start a fight without a reason, so he promised that he would follow his orders as long as they did not cause problems. Listening to all this, Murad suddenly wanted to know why he put them to sleep and handed them over to the director. Lee Khan thought that this was an easy question, because back then they were on different teams, that's all. But apparently this was not the answer they expected to hear from him. Dyugdu tried to tell Lee Khan that it was better not to say this now. But Lee Khan didn't understand why, because now he was trying to eliminate this misunderstanding. The troll was trying to tell him that there are misunderstandings that cannot be resolved. Ingerdell continued to tell them that each group must enter the building in turn and the monster will wait inside, and each group must get out of here independently. As soon as Lee Khan's group entered this building, the guy immediately thought that it was so light outside. But on the contrary inside, it seemed to him that the professor must have arranged everything so that they fought the monster in the dark. But he didn't like this development of events, so he decided to use light magic to illuminate the room. Murad, looking at all this, still admitted in his head that Lee Khan was really a capable guy, and this irritated him even more. But apparently they will have little time to think about such trifles, because as soon as the light appeared in this room, they saw a huge bull with ice spikes all over its body. Moreover, this one was clearly not the friendliest animal the guys could meet. Suddenly Lee Khan noticed one important detail, namely that the energy of a magical strengthening potion was hovering around the bull. This means that perhaps this is the same bull that Urgelma was so worried about when he heard that in the forest they fought only with a golem. Lee Khan tried not to believe it until the end, but apparently it is so. In any case, now the main thing is to pull yourself together and understand what to do next. And while Lee Khan was thinking about this, he noticed two types of energy around this bull, and it was the energy of the strengthening potion and the energy of the spirit. Then, Dyugdu did not fully understand what they needed to do. Although Murad believed that everything they were saying now was complete nonsense, and there was no point in talking so much about this nonsense. Lee Khan believed that it would be quite difficult to deal with such a bull with simple attacks, so he decided to find out, or does anyone know how to fill a weapon with mana? And according to his partners, they are both capable of doing this, although from Murad's face he didn't really believe it. The thing was that mentally Murad could not understand how Lee Khan knew about this technique if he was not from a knightly family. Lee Khan, meanwhile, suggested splitting up and attacking the bull. But Murad immediately interrupted him and began to say that facing the bull head-on means being in the most convenient place for him. So Giselle asked Dyugdu to pass the question to Lee Khan, in which I wanted to know who was standing in the center. The troll didn't quite understand why he should convey this or that phrase when they were standing next to each other. But Lee Khan was not going to talk to Murad then, since he didn't want it so much. So he also asked Dyugdu to convey that the captain always stands in the center. Dyugdu, listening to all this, couldn't even think that these two guys were still such children, so he jokingly told them to decide on rock, paper, scissors. As a result, it turned from a joke into a serious idea, and after a while they decided that Lee Khan would stand in the center. The guys' strategy was quite simple. They wanted to split up in order to approach from 3 sides until the bull reacted. After his reaction, the student he runs towards will focus on running away while the other 2 attack. The only problem that Lee Khan had was that he simply did not know how to avoid the bull's attacks. And besides, in his opinion, the most tired person in this hunt would be the bait, and it would be much easier for those who attacked. Either way, the plan seemed pretty good to them until that bull started screaming. From such a roar, the guy's ears were blocked, and now it was clear what the bull was up to. Lee Khan understood that the bull would not just calm down, and most likely he would attack him. In that case, instead of approaching him, Lee Khan decided to use water magic. Dyugdu never tired of saying that Lee Khan's magic is simply amazing, and he definitely has a talent for it. But after a few minutes, they realized that the water balloons weren't really that much of a help, because this bull was just dodging all those blows. Although it seemed that this bull was not so agile, and these water blows were applied in order to change the trajectory of this bull, which was now running to attack not Lee Khan, but Murad. And the guy understood this perfectly, although he could not do anything about it yet. Some time ago, Giselle was thinking while distributing responsibilities. and he thought that it would be quite nice to drive the bull to Vardanaz. But people with a similar type of thinking will always exist, and apparently Li Khan thought the same thing. Therefore, Murad still decided that he would do everything not to lose to Li Khan in such a battle. But he did not calculate that Li Khan was an excellent magician, and at some point he simply used his artifact, which helped him become invisible. And now the bull is aimed only at Murad, who, by the way, is already standing almost next to him. Giselle realized that in this case he had few options, or rather the only one, which was to go into battle, which he did. The guy was sure that he was able to get this bull, but as it turned out, the sword was not covered in blood at all. Did he really miss? Although, on the other hand, he immediately realized that in fact there is not much difference in this, because all the wounds that they can inflict on this bull will heal immediately. He realized that in this case he could not do anything about it, so he decided that he needed to use his mana and make his weapon much stronger. Now he was completely ready for battle and asked the bull to attack. The bull did not have to be asked for long, and he immediately accelerated to strike. But before he had time to do this, he received a blow in response. The attack was so strong that he was literally thrown several meters away, and only a wall could stop this free flight. It seemed that only Murad could attack like that, but from his face it quickly became clear that he had no idea what had happened. Finally, Li Khan was able to emerge from invisibility, but still he had losses. His sword literally crumbled into small pieces after a collision with this monster. On the other hand, the guy understood that since it was just a wooden sword, which he simply filled with mana, it would have broken anyway, so there was nothing to worry about, especially since Gyugdu was quite interested in finding out how Li Khan managed to kill this bull with just one blow. Li Khan would have gladly told him about this, but he saw how this bull was starting to rise, and so he decided that it would be better to leave now. After which he literally began to run and advised Durju to also use this chance to get out of here. The troll completely agreed with him, but he was quite scared to look back. Because there was Murad, who fled with the thoughts that he was used by Lahan again. Now he wanted revenge even more. In any case, the troll thought that after finishing this lesson, they would never be in the same group again. Finally, the time came when the last group left this dark room, and apparently the lesson should be over. At least that's what it seemed to Li Khan, until Professor Ingerdell called them over. At that moment, Li Khan thought that in their group there were those who could fill the sword with mana in order to complete the task faster. But he was interested in finding out how the other guys were able to defeat the bull. Ingerdell interrupted his thoughts when he began to tell the guys that they did a great job, because they managed to get out, but one group decided not to stop there and pacify the bull. Li Khan was a little upset when he heard that they just needed to get out of there, although then he really thought about the fact that the professor didn't tell them anything about why they had to fight. Before saying what kind of group was able to defeat the bull, the professor first decided to ask how they felt after colliding with the monster, to which the students answered him that he was stronger and faster than they could think, and this made them surprised. The professor was not surprised by this answer, because he perfectly understood that for most of them, this was quite expected. But the most important thing he thought was that they realized something when they got out of there, namely that there was nothing to be afraid of. He also added that to get rid of fear, you need to look it in the face. This also applies to fencing. And if they don't understand how to win, then in his opinion they shouldn't despair. They just need to figure out how they can escape, and he's very glad that today they learned this from their own experience. And the most important news in this lesson was that the professor decided to keep them in the same groups for classes this semester. It seemed to him that mutual understanding within the groups was better than he thought. This, according to the guys, was the worst decision that could have been made. Meanwhile, in the Tower of the Horned Beast in the alchemy teaching classroom, Yenna and Nilya finally finished preparing for their next lesson. Suddenly her joy was interrupted by Li Khan, who finally came to class, but for some reason Yenna was not too happy to see him. The whole point was that it seemed to her that he was being treated like a prisoner, but according to Li Han, she misunderstood him because they agreed to protect him after the end of the lesson. The two guys immediately started talking about how they both could think that any place outside of their tower was a battlefield, and so they decided to do everything to protect Li Han from any danger. Moreover, there are monsters and these tiger students roaming outside the tower, who only want to harm Li Khan, and only they can protect him. Yenna believed that even if they all attacked him together, Li Khan would still win. Suddenly she was interrupted by Siana, who immediately said that she supports the guys who are protecting Li Khan, because now it seems to her that they are really in a very dangerous situation. Li Han remembered that he needed to praise Siana as much as possible, so he decided to call her an unsurpassed genius of whom the Order of Flimang is proud, and also added that he was incredibly happy to see her. She could only smile at these words, after which she came closer to Li Khan and handed him a potion that was made to repel monsters. To which the guy answered her that he was actually touched that she was giving him such an incredible gift. Before they had time to finish speaking, Professor Ergelma suddenly entered the class, who did not understand why they were standing in the aisle. So he asked them to quickly sit down in their seats. And while he was walking to his place, he wanted to ask the guys how they spent their weekend. But before they had time to answer, he immediately wanted to know if they had made the same potion that he asked them. They answered him with a smile that they had made the potions, although they did not mentally forget that it was thanks to him that their weekend went incredibly badly, and each of them was already secretly planning how to take revenge on the man someday. Lee Khan looked at them, and it seemed to him that at moments he even knew how to read their thoughts, although apparently they just had it written on their faces. In any case, the professor was a little shocked that they were all able to make the potion. Is that even possible? But if this was the case, then he could only tell them that they all did an excellent job, and he was even proud of them. After which he looked at all these potions, and said that since they had prepared a potion of friendship with lower-level spirits, this could only mean that they had already taken the first step on the path of a novice alchemist. Of course, he understood that their final product might not be perfect, but still they had to start somewhere. And for the sake of experiment, he decided to demonstrate that because the potion was too weak, it created a small flame. He didn't stop there and decided to try the next potion, which also seemed very weak to him. But as soon as he dropped the potion on this tree, he immediately realized that he was mistaken, because the flame was very strong, and the potion itself was very strong. He decided to look at the label and find out who made this potion after all. And as it turned out, it was Lee Khan. Although he saw the guy's name, the man realized that in fact there was nothing to be surprised at. Although later he still said that even though there were several well-made potions here, he still thought it was too early to rejoice. After all, now he was going to touch on a truly serious topic which they should learn better than these potions. And today, as it turned out, he would like them to practice real spirit. Because the man believed that to become a true alchemist, they needed to focus on increasing the effectiveness of the potion, and the easiest way to achieve this was perfume. Lee Khan was a little upset because he didn't think that perfume looked like that. Although on the other hand, there was also a spirit sitting in his robe. At least it seemed so to him until that moment. But all this only made him think that now he seemed to understand why dark magic was unpopular now. The professor continued to talk about how Mr. Rabbit is an ice spirit that he often uses. And the man also decided to immediately warn the guys that they should not underestimate him because of his cuteness, because he is strong enough to crush all of them alone. In his opinion, now it will be too difficult for them to establish contact, so he advised them to start slowly approaching the spirits of the lower level. Making friends with higher spirits will be difficult at the beginning, and trust must be gained gradually. The professor wanted them to understand one very important thing, that the stronger the energy of the spirits, the easier it is to get into their world, and what he is doing now is strengthening this very energy. After which he suggested that they try it themselves, and for this they must first focus on getting closer to the spirits, and the only way to do this is to show them your sincerity. Urgulma once again noted that the spirits would understand if they approached them with evil intentions. Lee Khan listened to him very carefully at that moment, because it seemed to him that this was actually the most useful lesson during his entire training. And now, after all these words, the professor asked them to take and drink this potion. And as soon as they did this, the professor began to smile incredibly hard, and then generally wished them a good journey. A few seconds after Lee Khan drank this potion, his body seemed to be transported to another dimension, where he stood between a volcano and icy mountains. This feeling at that moment reminded him of the director's black book, and it seemed to him that this was how it really should be. He thought that he seemed to have entered the territory of the spirits of fire and ice, and both were not so bad for him. Therefore, he was only for starting what he came here for. Ina literally squealed with happiness because it was simply amazing. She couldn't believe that in reality, only a few seconds had passed, and she had been in the spirit world for so long. Asan responded by telling her that he had spoken with the spirit of the carp and thought that his feelings had passed through him. This dialogue was immediately interrupted by Professor Urgulma, who asked them to stop and said that if they wanted to discuss this, then they had better return to their towers. But first, he wanted to say that he hoped that they all finally understood how difficult it is to establish a connection with spirits, and from now on, he wants them to get closer to them whenever possible. And with that, he announced that the lesson was over and they could return to their towers. But this did not apply to everyone, and the professor did not forget to ask Lee Khan to stay for a few words. And as soon as all the other guys left, the man decided to check with Lee Khan how it all went, and mentally asked him not to say that the guy was already able to make friends with the spirit. But the answer was unexpected for the professor, because Lee Khan, with complete disappointment on his face, said that it was simply terrible. This caused laughter and joy in the professor, although Lee Khan did not fully understand what was so funny about it. The whole point was that the professor was thinking at that moment that this is exactly what a novice alchemist should be like, and therefore he wanted to find out from Lee Khan what had happened. Had the spirit really not listened to him? The guy answered him that in fact, when he got into the world of spirits, they all ran away when they saw him. According to Lihan, he met quite a lot of spirits, but they all simply ran away from him. No matter who he tried to talk to, everyone had the same reaction. The professor was a little stupefied by such a story. He did not expect that all the spirits would run away from Likan. And if you think about it, then at that moment, he had only one story in his head. This is the story of someone who first entered the spirit world after becoming an archmage. It was easy for him to get there thanks to his strength, but all the spirits simply turned away from him. And it was all because of the powerful aura that they felt from his soul. It simply frightened them. Listening to this story, Likan still didn't fully understand what was wrong with him then. It seemed to the professor that this might actually be related to his amount of mana, but he immediately decided to calm the guy down, saying that fortunately there was a solution for this. Because this story ended well, because the Archmage still managed to make friends with the spirits, and this made Likan smile. Because he wanted to quickly find out what this magician did. According to the professor, he forcibly captured the spirits with the help of magic, and then they had to make friends with him. This is not exactly the decision that Likan wanted to hear. It seemed to Likan that the spirit was much stronger than the magicians in his world, but according to the professor, they had a small problem. In any case, the professor believed that the guy needed to try, because the process could actually be exciting. Likan no longer quite believed his words, but still nodded, and agreed to everything this crazy professor said. Siana generally believed that this was a big problem, and did not hesitate to say this to Lihan directly to his face. She believed that often spirits simply do not understand people, and this is very sad. After which she decided to tell the story of how something similar happened in her church, but Likan was more interested in whether this could be avoided. According to her, the church used potions that were similar to the ones they used in class today. But the most important thing is that with the help of these potions you can communicate with spirits, and this has already interested the guys much more. Therefore, she continued to talk about how the Freising Church, which specializes in perfumes, uses a secret recipe for the potion, and she even helped them create it. She believed that if she could get the ingredients, she would prepare it for Lihan and the others. However, this will require a lot of ingredients, and the list there was really not small. Likan understood that there were more than 100 ingredients, and this was actually too much. But still, out of curiosity, he decided to ask her where they could get all this. Siana responded to this question with a smile, because as it turned out, she still had one option. And this option was Professor Urgulm's laboratory, which is located somewhere on the upper floors of this building, and all the ingredients should be there. Therefore, if they have enough determination, then she is ready to accompany them to secretly kidnap them. It was quite duplicitous for Likan to pray at this moment, but apparently the girl is serious about it. But the other guys apparently didn't understand this, and simply shouted that she was amazing, and it was no wonder that everyone praised her so much at this school. Although they were stopped at one point by Likan, who asked them all to wait, because first he wanted to know if it was too dangerous. Siana suddenly became angry when she heard such a question from her, because she always believed that the academy actually encourages such methods, and it is just a lesson that the professors are trying to teach them. At least that is what Siana thought. Likan didn't know how she came to this conclusion, but to be honest, he completely agreed with her. And to be honest, the offer itself was quite tempting for him, and it seemed to him that if they received the ingredients, they would be able to use them for other purposes in the future. He could also do a lot of things if they had a really large batch of such ingredients. But before he could finish his thought, suddenly someone tapped him on the shoulder. It was Nilya, whose boyfriend immediately asked what she wanted from him. As it turned out, the girl was tired of being alone, and she asked Likan to take her on this task. Likan could only smile and think that Nilya was unlikely to be like this from the very beginning. But still, no matter how much everything around changes, there is something that remains unchanged, and these are Likan's lessons with the professor of combat magic, who did not stop and continued to mock the guy as best he could. Professor Velati did not stop even when Likan missed too many blows. But even at such moments, he still believed that the guy was to blame, because he simply could not concentrate. Lihan could only respond by asking for forgiveness for this, although he was mentally thinking about how he could even react when this man was constantly accelerating and throwing even more stones. And where did the lessons on rotating the spiritual star stone go? Not only did Lihan feel confused, the professor was also actually very puzzled, because the man simply didn't understand why Lihan suddenly felt so bad. The fact that a professor could break through a student's defense was obvious, but Professor Velati didn't even think about it. Instead, he thought for a long time and came to a different conclusion. After which he told Likan that he understood everything, and at that moment the guy could only hope that they were finally going on a break. The professor added that he understood why it was difficult for him to concentrate, because he was trying to spin the ball as if defeating a golem. Likan didn't understand at all what kind of nonsense this professor was talking about, because in this situation everything is simple. The professor still thought that he just wanted to do too much stuff, so he advised Lihan to calm down a little and do everything more slowly. For the first time, Professor Volati put himself in the student's shoes, and thus he was able to easily find a way to solve this problem. Even if he had been told not to do this, he would have done it anyway, because he believed that those who are not able to take a step when the path lies right in front of them cannot become magicians. Likan decided to ask the professor why he suddenly started answering this way, to which the man replied that Likan's impatience is good, after which he asked the guy a question in which he wanted to know what a teacher should do to stop a student walking along a treacherous path. And the answer, according to the man, was quite obvious. You just need to force the student to concentrate. Now every time Likan takes a step, a ball will fly at him, but at maximum speed. Likan still managed to turn away from the first such ball, but he felt all the force that the man put into this blow. Before he had time to move away from the previous blow, another ball was already flying towards Likan, which only luck would help him dodge. The only thing Likan could come up with at that moment was a water wall, which was still able to block this attack. Although he had to get completely wet, what irritated him the most was that apparently the man was going to continue to attack like that. Is Professor Volati really trying to destroy his student? Although on the other hand, Likan understood that this was actually a meaningless question because since this is Professor Volati, then apparently it is so. And since it came to this, Likan decided that he would do everything possible not to die. Moreover, he would try to destroy the professor in response. And while he was thinking, Professor Volati began to strike him with his balls, which became more and more difficult to dodge. Therefore, Likan immediately realized that it was simply impossible to fight in this way, so the best option for him was to first find a way to stop him. In this case, he decided to use water again and his usual spell, which he called Splash. Professor Volati almost immediately realized that Likan was currently simply trying to increase the number of balls. Although it seemed reasonable to him, he was still sure that it would be more difficult for him to control them. But apparently Likan didn't care at all. He just continued to cast his spell and tried to create a huge shield around himself. Water Shield is a second ring spell that Lihan only recently learned, but it has already been incredibly useful and frequently used for him. In itself, it is not particularly complex, but to be honest, it made a strong impression on Volati. However, in any case, the professor believed that this shield would be quite easy to break through. At least that's what it seemed at first glance, because as soon as he struck, Likan managed to block it in good time. And now everything became clear to the man. Since he did not need to move his shield, he could focus solely on strengthening it, which is why he managed to repel this blow. Lihan interrupted his thoughts because now it was his turn to attack. The professor was a little disappointed with this attack because it was too easy for him. He was able to dodge without even taking a step. Likan understood that such elementary attacks were unlikely to work, so he had already prepared another trump card, which would be the very bone that he immediately sent to attack. But this was not enough in Likan's opinion, so he decided to push the table after the bones, which flew straight at the professor. Volati, without thinking for a long time, used his ball, which remained on his table. And literally with just one movement, he was able to repel all the attacks that Likan tried to inflict on him. Moreover, he launched an attack that was able to penetrate the guy's shield and cause him damage. After which, Likan realized that all his attacks were just useless attempts to inflict at least some damage on the professor, and it was unlikely that anything would come of it. The guy still can't wrap his head around the fact that he was able to cope with everything in a split second. Volati actually knew that the guy was trying to do everything to destroy him, but quite expectedly it didn't work out. Although according to the teacher today, he was more than pleased with Likan's work. So he told the guy that he was a great fellow. After a while of countless questions, Likan finally understood Professor Volati's intentions. But what surprised him most was the fact that the man liked the way the guy fought. It seemed to Likan that this was because he had tried everything possible. Well, almost everything. The next time it seemed to Likan that it would be nice to use fire. But suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by Volati, who told him that in fact this is normal, that he likes to twist the sphere. And over time the professor promised him that he would learn this, so no need to worry. But he asked him to understand one important thing, that sometimes retreat is still the best way out of the situation. So in the end he asked Lihan not to be upset, because the next lesson would be about what he demonstrated today, which was new for Lihan. So he asked again, what will they do in the next lesson? The guy didn't understand at all what the professor was telling him. But looking at how Volati continued to remain silent, Likan realized that apparently there would be no explanation today either. Instead of answering, Volati made Likan, sitting on a flat chair, simply fall to the floor, after which a bunch of chairs and tables flew up right in front of him, looking quite terrifying. Volati told him that from now on they will work on concentration in unpredictable situations. And from that moment on, the professor allowed the guy to use everything he does today, and he,